Chapter 759. He hugged the Empress contentedly and rubbed himself against her before leaving her embrace. Although his body was still cold, he was afraid that Lin Xiaola wouldn't be able to hold on for long. He looked down at Lin Xiaola, who was lying on the ground. Water was still flowing out of her mouth. Ren Baqian pressed his hand on her stomach, and yellow spring water spurted out like a fountain. On the other hand, the other winged cavalry warriors surrounded the earth-ean spring, and excitedly looked at the faces that appeared in the lake. They even expressed their thoughts in high spirits. I remember this person. He was a lieutenant in Great Xia. His position wasn't low, but he wasn't very strong. I killed him with one strike. I didn't expect to see him again. I don't remember him. I killed so many people that I can't remember them. I saw the Jing tribe people here. I was at that city back then. Do you think they can jump out? I killed him with one strike when he was alive, and now that he's dead he's still killed with one strike. Just as Ren Baqian was wondering if he needed to give her CPR, Gongjing shouted, "She's breathing. It seems like she's fine." Upon closer inspection, her chest was indeed rising and falling. After all, she was a spirit will expert and quite resistant. Ren Baqian regretted leaving the Empress's embrace so early. If he had known that Lin Xiaola was so resistant, he would have hugged her longer. He looked up at the Empress, who gave him a cold look. She probably meant to tell him to experience it himself. Ren Baqian looked up at Gongjing and said, "Sir Gongjing, get someone to find some wood for the fire. Prepare more as I will probably need it in the future." He had tested the temperature of the spring water, and estimated that it would freeze once he went down. It was better to prepare some firewood first. After all, there wasn't any firewood in this valley, and there were only sparse trees after walking for a long distance. Although he hoped that the Empress would hug him every time he came up, her body temperature wasn't comparable to a bonfire. He reckoned that she wouldn't be in the mood to hug him after cultivating in the water for a while. After a while, Lin Xiaola woke up and looked at the Empress bitterly. "It hurts. It won't hurt if you eat some sweets." Ren Baqian looked at her pitiful expression, and gave her a bunch of white rabbit creamy candies. "Do you think I'm a fool?" Lin Xiaola touched the bump on her forehead and looked at him as if he was a fool. "I was hit by such a big rock, and now I have a big bump on my forehead. Do you think giving me a candy will make it go away?" Ren Baqian grabbed another handful of sweets for her. Lin Xiaola started to hesitate. He grabbed another handful. "It doesn't seem to hurt that much anymore." Lin Xiaola stood up from the ground with a smile on her face. "Are we still going to catch Taitu Mongshan?" Ren Baqian recalled what happened just now and felt that she was really a talent. "I won't let him get away with this," Lin Xiaola said viciously as she peeled off the candy wrapper. However, with that face of hers, even if she made a vicious expression, it wouldn't be very intimidating. It was like a cat getting angry at you. Although her lethality was not comparable to that of a feline. Ren Baqian stood by the pool and thought for a while. He took out a glass bottle from his bag and filled it up. He then got someone to fetch the demonic butterflies that had been killed in the village, and controlled the human body. He said to the Empress, "I'll send them back for testing before you start training." "I'll go too," the Empress said and held his hand. The two of them found a corner, and disappeared into thin air. Before they disappeared, the Bichi rushed into Ren Baqian's arms as usual. Many of the winged cavalry warriors were already used to this sight, although they were occasionally curious about how they disappeared, and where they went. One day later, the two of them brought back a large number of desserts and wine. Although the spring water and the corpses of the demonic butterflies had been sent to the Messier 87 department, it would still take a long time for them to be tested. No one knew how many things were hidden on Earth, and it wasn't something that could be found in a day or two. It was more important for him to train now. Even if it was a quick method, he was still in a rush. After resting by the pool for half a day, Ren Baqian wore a pair of Hawaiian floral underpants and prepared to go into the water. The gloomy valley, the strange spring water, and the casual Hawaiian underpants always gave people a weird feeling. "Tie the rope. Pull it if you have any problems." The Empress threw a rope to him. Ren Baqian tied the rope around his waist and gave the Empress an OK sign. Without any hesitation, he walked toward the yellow spring water. One step, 2 steps, 3 steps. The water reached his knees in no time, and the bone-piercing coldness kept washing up from his legs. Renbachian shivered and jumped back to the shore. Your Majesty, it's so cold. Please hug me. The Empress raised her eyebrows. The corners of her mouth curled up, revealing an expression that made people feel a little dangerous. Actually, I still have to work harder. Renbachian immediately turned around and jumped back into the water. However, after taking a few steps, his legs began to cramp. Fortunately, this level of pain was nothing to him. After stretching his legs a few times, Renbachian jumped back to the shore again and said, "Cramp. I have to do some warm-up exercises for such cold fruits." In front of everyone, Renbachian shamelessly performed the 13th set of radio calisthenics. Then he nodded at the Empress and said, "It should be fine now." The Empress curled her lips. This kind of exercise was useful for ordinary people, but it was useless for an earth-will expert. It was better to perform a set of boxing moves. However, Renbachian didn't jump back to the shore this time. He calmly walked down step by step until he reached his neck. In the surrounding water, human heads were rolling and roaring, wanting to pounce on him and bite his flesh. These were people that Renbachian had killed before. Many of them were familiar faces, but he ignored them all. The coldness had already caused his skin to turn blue, but Renbachian wasn't moved at all. This kind of cold and pain was much worse than being burned to death by fire or being cut by a sharp blade. While repeatedly recalling the training method in his mind, he placed his hands on his lower abdomen, crossed his hands, and pressed inward 7 times. Then he stopped at his lower abdomen, allowing the essence energy in his body to flow through his palms and lower abdomen back into his body, forming a cycle. The Empress stood on the shore and watched Renbachian motionless in the water. She turned her head and said to Gongzheng, "There's no need for so many people to stay here. The rest of you, go find some food in the distance and check out the surrounding situation. Divide them into groups based on the journey that takes 1 to 3 days." After letting Gongzheng assign the manpower, the Empress found a rock on the shore with a rope and sat down. She stared at Renbachian, who was in the spring. After an hour, she saw Renbachian swaying in the water and falling down. She pulled the rope in her hand, and Renbachian flew out. While still in the air, the Empress caught Renbachian in her arms, and felt that he was as cold as an ice cube. Renbachian's entire body had turned blue from head to toe. His eyes were tightly shut, and his teeth were chattering nonstop. She then touched his chest and found that only his chest and abdomen were still warm. Seeing him like this, the Empress felt a little sad. Without turning her head, she said, "Start a fire." Then, she hugged Renbachian tightly. Chapter 760. Renbachian only woke up after 4 hours. Before he opened his eyes, he felt that he was in a soft embrace. It was very soft. Traces of heat flowed into his body from that body, and dissolved the coldness in his body. At the same time, there was heat from the fire in front of him, making him sweat. Renbachian tried to move to a more comfortable position, but the Empress pulled him to the ground. Renbachian was lying on the ground. When he opened his eyes, he saw the dusky sky. The sky here was different from the outside world. The sky outside always made you think of heat, but it was also clear, blue, and relaxing. But here, it was the complete opposite. This made Renbachian guess that there was something floating in the air in this valley. Just like the haze on Earth, this was the only way the sky looked different. This was probably one of the reasons why he had hallucinations. "Wipe your snot," the Empress said as she glanced at him. Renbachian sniffled and realized that his snot was flowing out of his mouth. Furthermore, his nose was blocked and he couldn't smell anything. "I seem to have caught a cold." Renbachian subconsciously said this with a head full of question marks and disbelief. Did he catch a cold from practicing martial arts? Even though it was a little cold, this was a martial arts practice. This was a martial arts practice. This was a martial arts practice. In the Xianxia novels, people often practiced in icebergs and fire caves. Who had ever heard of them catching a cold? Imagine a nascent soul stage-old monster sitting cross-legged on an iceberg, snot dripping from his nose, shivering as he cultivated. This didn't make sense. Renbachian got up and turned around. His body was very cold even though he was next to the fire. His head hurt a little. His body didn't feel very well either. This made him feel more and more like he had caught a cold. Then he looked at the Empress doubtfully. What happened? The Empress began to worry when she saw his appearance. She didn't know what was wrong with him. I actually caught a cold. Rinpoche repeated. I have seen it in a television series. People with a runny nose have the same symptoms as you. However, this doesn't seem to be a serious illness. The Empress nodded seriously. The problem isn't the symptoms. Your Majesty, have you ever caught a cold? Rinpoche had an exaggerated expression as if the world was about to end. The Empress looked at him coldly. The answer was self-evident. Rinpoche spun a few rounds on the ground. He was surprised that he had caught a cold. It also made him feel that at certain times, he was no different from an ordinary person. Or, was there a problem with the earthine spring? After thinking for a long time, he decided to put this matter aside. Rinpoche walked to the side and cut off 2 legs from a ferocious beast with 3 horns that looked like a lion. He made several incisions on them, sprinkled some seasoning on them, and roasted them over the fire. Are these ferocious beasts treated with this spring water? Rinpoche suddenly thought of something and asked. Outside the valley, there's a small stream about half a day's journey away. We dealt with it there, someone immediately said. Rinpoche nodded and looked at Lin Xiaola. She was lying on a rock and sleeping soundly. It seemed like drowning in the earthine spring didn't affect her at all. This made Rinpoche feel more at ease. However, he also knew that Lin Xiaola was different from him. She was a spirit wheel expert, and it was only her appearance that made her look like a human. After roasting the 2 beast legs, the smell was a little sour and smelly, and it made people lose their appetite. However, after taking a bite, Rinpoche's eyes lit up. It smelled bad, but it was extremely fresh and tender. There was also a tempting aroma in his mouth and tongue. It could be said to be the durian stinky tofu of the beast world. Your Majesty. Rinpoche handed one to the Empress. Forget it, I'll eat this. The Empress expressed her disdain for the thing in his hand with her eyes, and took out 3 pieces of cake from the bag at the side. Cakes as big as a wash basin. Moreover, there were 3 pieces. Rinpoche didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It doesn't smell good, but it tastes really good. The Empress frowned and took the cake doubtfully. Although she didn't deliberately smell it, the sour and smelly smell still entered her nose. This made her feel extremely disgusted. However, she trusted that Rinpoche wouldn't lie to her about this matter. She frowned and took a bite, and her eyebrows immediately relaxed. Not bad. What kind of beast is this? Rinpoche asked. This is a mountain willow. It doesn't smell good, but it tastes good, Yisheng answered and added. It tastes really good after eating. Rinpoche didn't mind. After experiencing the baptism of the skunk bomb, this was a small problem. However, after eating it, he realized that the taste was just as Yisheng had said. Even the Empress couldn't avoid the sour and smelly smell, which made her frown. This kind of smell had always been the natural enemy of women. After eating, Rinpoche felt a little better, and did the 14th set of radio calisthenics. Why don't you go back? I have already asked Zidonglai to find a cultivation vessel for you. The Empress said softly with concern. Your Majesty, you underestimate me. This earthine spring isn't a big problem for me. Rinpoche laughed heartily, which was rare for him. Seeing this, the Empress didn't say much and only said, be careful. Rinpoche entered the water again, and repeated the previous movements. In fact, there were only 8 movements in this set, and Rinpoche needed to master this movement before he could proceed to the next one. The Empress continued to stare blankly at him from the shore. Figures surrounded Rinpoche and roared at the Empress, but it didn't affect him at all. This time, Rinpoche persisted for about the same amount of time as the previous time. Seeing that he was on the verge of collapse, the Empress pulled him up, hugged him to keep him warm, and pushed him to the ground when he woke up. Then he ate something to replenish his energy, and went into the water again. A day later, Rinpoche finally lasted a little longer in the water. After a quarter of an hour, he began the second movement. He pressed on his lower abdomen and patted it left and right. Then he alternately patted his lower abdomen twice on each side. The Empress was finally relieved and took out the comic book that she carried with her. A day later, she received a piece of news that made her put down the comic book in her hands. Your Majesty, another village has been discovered in the vicinity. It's the same as the one we saw the other day. Gongzheng reported to the Empress with a serious face after receiving the news. The Empress's face turned serious upon hearing this. The second village. Have you confirmed it? The Empress asked. I have. The people inside are exactly the same as the one we saw the other day. Their expressions are blank, and they don't have any reaction. They are all above 30 or 40 years old. Gongzheng nodded. How many people are there? It's a little bigger than the previous one. I estimate that there are more than 200 people. Kill them all. At the same time, expand the search area and see if there are any more such villages. The Empress said in a deep voice. Previously, she thought that this village was an exception, but now, it didn't seem to be the case. What worried her even more was that she had never heard of such a thing before, but it had been discovered twice in this land that very few people had set foot in. In that case, would there be more villages in this land? Chapter 761. When Ren Baqian woke up again, the Empress didn't throw him aside, and allowed him to lie in her arms. Before he turned around, he felt that the atmosphere around him wasn't right. There were fewer winged cavalry warriors around him, and the remaining carefree ones had a serious look on their faces. Your Majesty, what happened? Ren Baqian adjusted his posture and felt extremely comfortable. It also gave him space to daydream. This is an embrace full of charm. Then he was thrown aside by the Empress. Lying on the ground, he tilted his head and looked at the Empress with a cold expression. However, it wasn't directed at him. Your Majesty? Ren Baqian asked again. It's nothing. The Empress shook her head. She obviously didn't want Ren Baqian to be distracted by other things. Tell me, maybe I can come up with some ideas. Ren Baqian laughed. I'm the Empress of Dayo, the Empress said unhappily. I can still handle such a small matter. Upon hearing what the Empress said, Ren Baqian kept his mouth shut and quietly lay there to rest. After a few minutes, he curled his body into a ball, and allowed his essence energy to flow through every point of contact in his body to repair the damage caused by the invasion of the cold air. Half an hour later, he stretched his body again, but his stomach was rebelling. This was just the beginning of this technique, and it already consumed a lot of heat to resist the coldness of the earth-in spring. The heat produced by the essence energy in his body and the coldness of the earth-in spring were constantly fighting in his body, changing the state of his body through the repeated battles. Of course, this was only the beginning of familiarizing his body with the earth-in spring. In the third movement, Ren Baqian had to open his pores and let the coldness enter his body, and wash through it repeatedly, further changing the state of his body. Next, the essence energy would cover every inch of his body until it merged with every cell on the surface, and no longer flowed back into his body. At this point, the surface of his body would undergo preliminary changes. It was equivalent to having a layer of protection. According to Ren Baqian's understanding, this technique was similar to the legendary Golden Bell Cover. However, the Golden Bell Cover and Iron Skin required repeated beatings and application of medicine to change the hardness of the body. The cold air of the earth-in spring was one of those attacks, and it was continuously attacking his body. On the other hand, the essence chi in his body played the role of resistance and repeated repair. In the end, when the essence chi in one's body had completely filled up one's entire body, fusing with every single cell in one's body, one would reach the legendary state of having a face thicker than a city wall. Wrong. Every part of his body had become much harder. Ren Baqian felt that there was a need to strengthen a certain part of his body. Although he was already very tough, and even the legendary tough guys weren't as tough as him, no one would refuse to be tougher. After another 2 days, Ren Baqian and the Empress returned to Earth. Everyone in the laboratory of the Messier 87 department was enthusiastically studying the earth-in water, and the corpse of the demonic butterfly that Ren Baqian brought back. Even though Ren Baqian had sent a lot of things over recently, the items that Ren Baqian had sent this time were very valuable to them. In their eyes, they were definitely good stuff. especially since the Yao butterfly had a human face. They also heard that this thing had lived in a person's stomach for more than 10 years, and that its face was the same as the original owner's. Everyone was filled with anticipation. However, the progress of the research was slower than expected. 7 days in the other world was equivalent to 21 days on Earth. The laboratory did its best and discovered 5 new elements in the Earth-ine water. Although 2 new elements had been discovered from the items that Rinpochian had brought back previously, there were new elements in the spring that weren't from those 2 elements. Furthermore, 2 of them were particularly special. These 2 elements intertwined with each other and moved as if they were inseparable. According to the laboratory researchers, the elements in the paradise were showing off their love. Many of the researchers who were obsessed with research and delayed their marriages felt that they had suffered a critical blow. The names of these 2 elements were different from the usual English and numerical names. Instead, they were given a pair of meaningful names, Liang Shambua and Zhuingtai. Apart from the discovery of these 5 new elements, there hadn't been any more progress in the experiment, and Rinpochian could only continue to wait. However, something else happened outside the laboratory. Rinpochian received an invitation letter. It was an invitation to a private salon, and the owner was the big shot from the internet. There were also a few other big shots among the participants. They were all at the top of the list of the richest people. Although Rinpochian was a little tempted, he had been busy with various things recently and still rejected the other party apologetically. This person is quite arrogant. He even disrespected Boss Ma. After Rinpochian rejected the invitation, 3 virtual screens floated in the air in a room, and one of them laughed. This was the latest technology, and Rinpochian hadn't had the time to understand it recently. Otherwise, he would have loved it. Rinpochian loved to try out all kinds of new technology. It's not just me. I've also put your names on the invitation list, the man called Boss Ma said with a smile. That's quite interesting. I did know a little about this person before, but someone at the top suppressed all news about him, so I didn't know much. This person is very mysterious. Another person opened his mouth and said, "We can see what the higher-ups are preparing for now from the recent policies. This person should be an important part of it. Have you heard about the new city?" Several people nodded. Although the country tried to cover up such a big matter, it still couldn't hide it from some people. Moreover, they felt that the country had begun to loosen its efforts to cover up these matters. This meant that the matter that needed to be covered up was about to be completed, or it was about to reach the point where people could know. This city should be one of the parts of the country's preparations. He is also involved in it. One of his subordinates and his younger brother have been to the new city recently. As soon as this was said, several people began to ponder. Although the new city was just a city, everyone knew that this city probably involved many secrets. Even they had to put in some effort to get some information about the new city, but this person was able to participate, which is enough to explain a lot of things. Boss Ma's charm isn't good. This person is young, and even heroes have a weakness for the charms of a beautiful woman. Boss Ma, you can try your honey trap. Someone chuckled. Ha! You must be joking. The man called Boss Ma laughed and said, "Honey trap? Anyone who did this would be in big trouble." However, he also knew that the other party was just joking. It would be a disgrace for someone of his status to use a honey trap on a junior. The few of them chatted for a while before turning off their screens. Everyone was quite busy and had their own schedules. Chatting like this was a time that they had deliberately chosen. No one was angry that Rinpochian refused to give them face. People of this status naturally wouldn't behave like ordinary people. They had their own bearing. After making some arrangements, Rinpochian stayed for 2 days and returned to Dayo. Nowadays, training was a race against time. After all, it wasn't long before the wedding. The journey here took 2 months, and there was still a long way to go on the return journey. Needless to say, he had to go back in advance to prepare. In other words, he could stay here for a maximum of 3.5 months. In these 3.5 months, he had to achieve initial results with this martial art. Chapter 762. For the next month, Rinpochian practiced in the Earth-ine spring every day. After a month, he finally didn't fear the coldness of the spring at all. During this month, the Empress's face became darker and darker. Every time Rinpochian came ashore, the Empress would always regain her cool demeanor. She would even hold a comic book in her hands and casually flip through it. However, Rinpochian could still feel that the Empress was like a volcano that was about to erupt. A violent feeling was slowly accumulating in her body. Even when Great Xia invaded, the Empress didn't have such a change. Even Qingyuan and Hongwan didn't smile as much. "Your Majesty, another village has been discovered," Gongzheng reported as he walked quickly to the Empress's side. The Empress looked at Rinpochian, who was still in the Earth-Ean Spring, and asked calmly, "How many is this?" "The 11th. Gongzheng's eyes were filled with anger. What exactly was it that actually turned so many of the aboriginals into this state? Among the 11 strongholds, there were at least 100 people, while the largest had more than 300 people. 2,000 people in 11 villages. Furthermore, this was the number that had been discovered so far. It was unknown how many more had yet to be discovered. So many people had been turned into puppets for at least 10 years. How could no one have noticed? Furthermore, why did they build a village here? One had to know that the environment around here wasn't suitable for building a village, as it was a barren land. It was impossible for these villages to have been here for a long time. According to the investigation of the winged cavalry, these villages were built about 20 to 30 years ago. This thing was planted in the aboriginals' bodies and controlled them to leave their original villages and come to this barren land. No one would believe that there wasn't a mastermind behind all of this. No one dared to believe it either. Crack. A crack appeared from top to bottom on the huge black rock that the Empress was sitting on. The Empress gently floated to the bottom of the rock and asked, "Have you dealt with it?" Yes. Gongzheng's heart was heavy. It was easy to say that it had been dealt with, but this was the fate of the aboriginals. Continue to search. Send everyone out to investigate in all directions and see how many more there are. Find out what exactly is causing trouble. If there is any news, inform me immediately," the Empress said with a cold look in her eyes. Yes. After Gongzheng left, the Empress found another rock and sat there in a daze. He was about to get married, and he was in a good mood. He didn't expect to encounter such a thing, and he didn't know how big the waves would be. She turned her head and looked at Lin Xiaola, who was sleeping soundly on the ground. Sometimes, the Empress was quite envious of her. Mentally handicapped children live a much happier life than ordinary people. He didn't have to think about anything else other than eating and sleeping. He would eat again when he woke up. Rinpochian stood in the middle of the Earth-Ean Spring, and the water just reached his chin. After another hour, Rinpochian slowly opened his eyes, and a trace of fatigue flashed across his eyes. His stomach was in knots again. There were still many faces in the lake around him. They had surrounded him since the first day he came here. Rinpochian even saw a bird among them. It was the bird that cursed and was squashed to death by him. Now that he thought about it, he was a little irritable at that time. Coldness always calms people down. Rinpochian smiled and nodded at the bird head that was opening its mouth at him. Umitba. The earlier I die, the earlier I can reincarnate. Who knows, I might still be human in my next life. He then waved at the Empress tiredly, and she reached out to pull him ashore. Rinpochian lay down tiredly and looked up at the sky. His position wasn't far from the Empress's skirt. He didn't know what the Empress was thinking. If it was in the past, she would have kicked him away, but she didn't care about it now. "I hate safety pants," Rinpochian suddenly said. The Empress moved her eyes, kicked him in the ribs, and sent him flying 5 to 6 meters away. Rinpochian landed on the ground, turned his body, and lay on his side. He looked at the Empress with one hand supporting his head and asked, "Is your Majesty angry again?" "No," the Empress said faintly. "It turns out that the rock is cracked." Rinpochian laughed. "It's too brittle," the Empress said simply. Rinpochian laughed again after hearing this. "Mind your own business and don't worry about anything else." The Empress sat on the rock and looked up at the sky. This valley was surrounded by mountain walls, and one could only see a large piece of the dusky sky above their heads. It had been more than a month, and the sky hadn't changed much. One couldn't help but wonder if it was painted on. Renbaqian looked at the Empress and knew that she didn't want him to worry. He sighed and lay flat on the ground again. He stretched out his limbs, and his fingers touched something soft. It was Lin Xiaola's face. Lin Xiaola turned her head in her sleep and bit him in return. Renbaqian took a deep breath. This girl's bite was really ruthless. Renbaqian had always been the type of person who would bite back if a dog bit him. His gaze wandered around Lin Xiaola's body for a long time, looking for a place to bite. There were a few places that were not bad, but if he did that, he would probably be beaten up by both women. He definitely couldn't do something that would put him at a disadvantage. He had to bear with it. Another half a month passed, and it had been almost 2 months since they arrived here. Gongzheng walked to the Empress's side again and said, "Your Majesty, we have discovered the 19th village." "I know. Just clean it up," the Empress said softly as she stroked her hair with her fingers. As time passed, the volcano seemed to have sunk to the bottom of the sea, and there were no longer any ripples on its surface. However, everyone knew that this volcano was only covered up. When it erupted again, it would erupt with even greater flames than before. "There's one more thing. If you have something to say, say it. Don't delay." The Empress twirled her hair with her fingers and then straightened it. It had been really boring in this valley for the past 2 months. 2 teams didn't return on time. Gongzheng whispered. Each team that went out to search this time had 5 people, and 2 teams had a total of 10 people. It wasn't a small matter for 10 people to go missing, especially when it came to scouting. The Empress stopped twirling her hair, turned her head, and stared at Gongzheng with a pair of cold eyes. "How long have they been missing?" "They have been missing for 13 days. We have a rough location, and they are 2 of the teams that have been searching the furthest. They are in the southwest direction, about 6 days away. They didn't return on time yesterday, and we thought that they were delayed. However, since they haven't returned today, I'm afraid that something has happened." The Empress moved, stopped, and turned to look at Renbaqian, who was in the Earth-Een Spring. "Your Majesty, I'll go and take a look myself." Gongzheng naturally knew that the Empress didn't want to leave now, even though Principal Run didn't seem to be in any danger. The Empress walked 2 steps on the ground, came to Lin Xiaola's side, and kicked her butt. Lin Xiaola flew up like she was riding on a cloud. In the air, she bared her fangs and brandished her claws as if she was startled. She twisted her body and landed on all 4s, crouched down like a wild beast, and scanned the surroundings fiercely. Chapter 763. Lin Xiaola was obviously confused and didn't know what had happened. After confirming that there were no enemies around, and that the Empress was the one who kicked her, she finally put away her fierce face. "Go with him and listen to his arrangements. Protect him and don't let him sleep," the Empress said as she pointed at Gongzheng. Lin Xiaola didn't really understand other things, but when she heard that she wasn't allowed to sleep, her face immediately turned bitter. She didn't want to sleep for so long, but she couldn't control this. Seeing her expression, the Empress said, "It's fine on the way, but when he wakes you up, you are not allowed to sleep. Be vigilant and come back with a few people. Otherwise, I'll skin you alive." Lin Xiaola lowered her head and pondered for a while. She twisted her index fingers and didn't move for a long time. "Choose as few people as possible and get ready to set off," the Empress said to Gongzheng. She ignored Lin Xiaola, who was twisting her fingers, and returned to the rock in a daze. When Renbaqian was pulled out of the water by the Empress, Lin Xiaola finally came back to her senses. She jumped in front of him and stretched out her hand. Renbaqian knew that she was begging for candy from her action. He took out a small bag of candy from his bag and threw it to her. She bounced off to look for Gongzheng. Since she was going to work, she had to get paid first. "She has been spoiled by you," the Empress said faintly. In the past, Lin Xiaola didn't want any benefits. Now, she actually stood there for a long time just to wait for them. People's hearts were degenerating. The world was degenerating. What is she going to do? Renbaqian asked casually. "Just a small matter." The Empress waved her hand and didn't say anything else. Renbaqian knew that if Gongzheng and the others couldn't handle it, Lin Xiaola would definitely be a big deal. He had seen the Empress's situation these days and knew that there was probably going to be a thorny problem. Although he wanted to ask, the Empress refused to say anything. Furthermore, she was the ruler of a nation, and it wouldn't be appropriate for him to ask more questions as if he was worried about her. The only thing he could do was to hurry up and practice. During the break, he chatted with the Empress for a while. Renbaqian leaned against the rock that the Empress was sitting on. He bent one leg and hugged it with his hands. His head was slightly tilted, and the back of his head rested on the Empress's thigh. "Congratulations, Your Majesty." Hong Wuan came in from outside the valley with a hint of joy on her face. She rushed to the Empress's side and congratulated her. The signal in the valley was bad, so the radio station was better on the hillside outside the valley. There was nothing much to do these days, so Hong Wuan became the person guarding the radio station. Hearing her say this, Renbaqian immediately knew that there was progress on the Yun Nation's side. Previously, a scholar from the Yun Nation had contacted a group of warlords to surrender. Afterward, Zidonglai pretended to attack while contacting that scholar. 3 months had passed since then. Now it seemed that it was time for them to bloom and bear fruit. "Speak." The Empress turned her head and looked at Renbaqian. The expression on her face relaxed a little. What happened in the mountains recently made her worried. It would be best if there was good news from the outside world. Hong Wuan didn't dare to keep him in suspense and quickly said, "Your Majesty, Wang capital city has been breached." Upon hearing this, the Empress finally smiled. After more than a year, Zidonglai finally gave her the result she wanted. Good news. Very good news. Renbaqian clapped his hands and laughed. "I really have to congratulate Your Majesty. Expanding territory is the #1 achievement for an emperor. How many emperors tried hard to achieve it? Xia Baichong planned for decades, but in the end, he died from the stench and died with everlasting regret. Yet Your Majesty easily obtained the Yun Nation. There's no need to compare the two. Moreover, with the prosperity of the Yun Nation, many things will be much more convenient in the future. With all kinds of resources, there will be a prosperous era in the future. Your Majesty's achievements will even surpass the late emperors, and you will be the #1 emperor in history." Renbaqian laughed heartily. In his opinion, it was natural for the Empress to be the #1 emperor in history. He had brought so much technology and brought so many changes to the world. Naturally, his name would be passed down to future generations, but the Empress would also be the #1 emperor in history. It's indeed a good thing. The Empress nodded and smiled. This news swept away the haze in her eyes. Seeing the Empress's smile, Hong Wuan heaved a sigh of relief and looked at Renbaqian with admiration. Sure enough, Principal Ren was good at flattering Her Majesty. Those words were something that she couldn't have imagined. Renbaqian suddenly thought of something and asked, "By the way, have the Emperor of the Yun Nation and Zheng Qingmian been caught? We have just broken through the outer city, and there is still resistance in the city. Protector Z said that he will present the two of them to Your Majesty no matter what. Your Majesty, this good thing needs to be celebrated." Renbaqian stood up and said, "There's wine in the valley. Bring it all out." The Empress glanced at him and said, "There's no harm in celebrating after this. Your Majesty, it's not a problem for me to cultivate. If nothing goes wrong, I should be able to reach the expected level within the specified time. Besides, I'm craving for wine." Renbaqian laughed. These days he had very little time to sleep and would only take some time to rest. His entire body and mind were focused on cultivation. His progress wasn't slow. More importantly, the Empress wasn't in a good mood these days, and everyone looked solemn. Renbaqian felt that the atmosphere was a little too heavy. He could take this opportunity to let everyone relax. No matter what they encountered, they couldn't always be tense. Outside the valley, there were many beasts with their limbs tied up and thrown to the side. Renbaqian ordered his men to leave only a few beasts alive and kill the rest. Then he took out all the wine. It was more than enough for him and the Empress, but it wasn't enough for more people. Fortunately, there were only about 30 winged cavalry warriors left. Every 2 of them could get a bottle of wine, which was barely enough. It was almost nightfall. Everyone found firewood, lit a bonfire in the valley, and began to roast food. In less than an hour, the strong aroma of roasted meat filled the entire valley. Renbachian and the Empress's bonfire was in the innermost part of the valley. They leaned against each other and sipped wine. From time to time, Renbachian would cut off a piece of meat and put it on the Empress's plate. This time, Renbachian cut off a small piece of meat and said to the Empress, "Ah, open your mouth." The Empress looked at him and opened her mouth slightly, revealing her snow-white teeth. Renbachian used the tip of his knife to pick up the meat, and the lower end of the meat hung right next to the Empress's mouth. Renbachian first swung the knife to both sides, then raised it a little, lowered it a little, and raised it a little again. The meat lingered near the Empress's lips and couldn't enter her mouth. After a few bites, the Empress bit off half a piece of meat at lightning speed and sent him flying with a slap. The winged cavalry warriors who saw this from afar were laughing. It was a rare laughter these days. After the wine and meat, the Empress said, "Accompany me for some fresh air." She held the wine bottle in one hand and walked out of the valley. These days she had been very bored. The matter of the village and the puppets had always been weighing on her mind. Now that she had good news and rested for a night, she didn't want to stay in this lifeless valley any longer. At first, the Empress didn't walk very fast, as if she was waiting for Renbachian. However, she walked faster and faster. In the end, Renbachian used all his strength to barely keep up with the Empress. After walking like this for 2 hours, the two of them finally reached a small hill. The sky here wasn't as static as it was in the valley. Although the sky wasn't as clear as other places, some stars could be seen twinkling in the sky. Renbachian scanned his surroundings and suddenly looked in a certain direction. "Your Majesty, look over there." He saw a faint green glow somewhere in the distance. "Let's go and take a look." The Empress took a step and traveled dozens of meters. "Your Majesty, wait for me," Renbachian quickly shouted. The Empress stood in place and waited for Renbachian to catch up. She felt that he was too slow, so she simply grabbed his waist and moved like the wind through the mountains. After another 2 hours, the two of them finally arrived at the place they saw on the hill. It was a woodland formed by strangely shaped trees. In the woodland, the place seemed to be covered with a layer of green fluorescence, emitting a faint green glow. It was especially conspicuous in the night. "Very beautiful. I didn't expect such a beautiful place to exist here." Renbachian praised after the Empress put him down. The two of them got closer and seemed to have disturbed something. The layer of green fluorescence on the ground suddenly floated up, as if it was blown by the wind. The two of them took a closer look and realized that it wasn't fluorescence, but a layer of butterflies. A layer of butterflies with green fluorescence on their wings. Previously, they were spread on the ground like a layer of fluorescence. Now that they were flying, the green glow covered the entire forest, and the scene was even more gorgeous. It was extremely beautiful. However, when Renbachian and the Empress looked at this beautiful dreamy scenery, their expressions suddenly changed. Chapter 764. A large number of butterflies with fluorescent wings fluttered in the forest. As they flapped their wings up and down, the green fluorescent light swayed up and down. It was supposed to be a beautiful and romantic scene. However, the human faces on the butterflies made the Empress feel a bone-piercing chill. Renbachian's face turned solemn. There were tens of thousands of butterflies in this forest. That meant thousands and tens of thousands of lives. Tens of thousands of lives that had quietly perished in the 60,000 mountains. "Your Majesty, it's not just the human faces," Renbachian suddenly said as he stared at the butterflies. "In that direction, there are many butterflies with the faces of ferocious beasts, such as saber-toothed tigers and apes. From the looks of it, there were only about a third of them. However, most of them were butterflies with human faces." At this moment, it was unknown whether the flying butterflies had alarmed something in the forest. Like the sound of a flute, a melodious yet sorrowful tune rang out. The butterflies were immediately attracted by the sound. "Let's go and take a look." The Empress suppressed her aura, walked more than 10 meters, and followed behind the butterflies. Renbachian took a few steps forward, leaped over the Empress, and reached out to catch a butterfly. He wanted to see what was going on with these butterflies with human faces. "Don't move," the Empress suddenly said and grabbed Renbachian. "Your Majesty?" Look at where these demonic butterflies are flying, the Empress said. Runbachian suppressed his doubts and looked ahead. After observing for a while, he suddenly found a problem. These butterflies rarely touched plants, but every time they did, leaves or other things would fall down. Runbachian rushed forward to check, and found that the leaves that fell seemed to have been cut. The wings of these demonic butterflies are like blades, the Empress said with a frown. Runbachian was a little speechless. These demonic butterflies were indeed extraordinary. They didn't look much different from ordinary butterflies, except that they were a little bigger, and each was about the size of 2 palms. In addition, they had strange human faces. However, these wings didn't look very special, but they were like sharp blades, which was simply shocking. However, when he thought about how much effort the other party had put in, each demonic butterfly was equivalent to a human life. It was only natural that it was extraordinary. Originally, he wanted to see what these strange butterflies were capable of. Otherwise, if the two of them were to collide head-on with these thousands of butterflies, it would be quite dangerous. However, after the Empress's reminder, he gave up on the idea of catching a butterfly to avoid alerting the enemy. The two of them chased the butterfly through the forest and came to a mountain wall. They saw a thin but extremely tall man standing in front of the cave. The flute-like sound came from a white bone in his hand. With a point of the white bone in the man's hand, the demonic butterflies flew into the cave. No wonder the winged cavalry didn't discover him at such a close distance. It turns out that he still has a hiding place, Runbachian said from behind the Empress. The Water Empress wore a cold expression and did not say a word. She walked towards the man step by step, and her aura was as sharp as a sword. For the past 2 months, the anger in her heart had been brewing. Every time she received news that a stronghold had been discovered, the anger in her heart would continue to rise. Every time she gave the order, lives would be sacrificed. However, the Empress would also feel pain in her heart. This pain would eventually turn into a monstrous rage, and she would prepare to burn everything down. Needless to say, the demonic butterflies that she had just seen were another few thousand lives. She did not expect to actually discover the mastermind under such circumstances. This finally gave the Empress the opportunity to vent her anger. However, the most important thing now was to capture him and figure out the whole story. After that, the Empress had already prepared 1,080 ways for him to die. However, the two of them stopped 70 meters away from the other party and looked at the man in front of them in shock. Under the dim light of the night, at this distance, the two of them could finally see the man's appearance clearly. However, his appearance did not look like that of a human's. He had green skin, long ears, a round nose that was much larger than an ordinary person's, and 4 extremely wide fangs protruded from his lips. Most importantly, his eyes. They did not have the eye sockets, sclera, and pupils of a human. Instead, 2 sunglasses-like objects were fastened over his eyes. However, upon closer inspection, one could see that they were the other party's eyes. They were filled with indifference and ruthlessness. Upon closer inspection, one could vaguely see that the sunglasses-like objects were made up of small hexagonal cubes. As soon as Runbachian saw the other party's eyes, he immediately thought of the compound eyes of insects that he had seen before. The other party was more than 2 meters tall, but his body and limbs were extremely slender. It looked as if he could be blown away by the wind. Before the two of them could speak, the other party spoke first. His voice was unexpectedly melodious, crisp, and pleasing to the ear like that of a young girl. You actually came with my jade-waisted slaves. You call them jade-waisted slaves? What are you? The Empress asked coldly. You can call me Boar, the other party replied. Previously, I sensed a group of aboriginals in the vicinity. My jade-waisted slaves were sufficient, and I would have let you go if you wanted to leave. I didn't expect you to find your way here, so I can't let you go. Are you alone or do you have other companions? Runbachian asked. I'm the only one here, the other party said without a care. This place belongs to me, and it's where I herd my jade-waisted slaves. Very well, the Empress said coldly. It seemed like he was the one who had taken over all the villages around here. What exactly are you? Runbachian asked. I've already said my name, So you have to say yours too. Isn't this the etiquette of you humans? The other party replied. Renbachian couldn't see any expression on his face. In particular, the color of his eyes was constantly changing. It was unknown how many hexagonal visual organs formed his compound eyes, but it always gave people goosebumps just by looking at them. I'm Chen Ergu. My name is Chen Fugue. Renbachian subconsciously gave two fake names. Although the Empress felt that these names were unpleasant to the ear, she couldn't care less about them given the current situation. What are you? The Empress asked this time. This was the third time she had asked this question. We are acceptance spirits that specialize in herding. Where are you from? How many people are there? Where are they? Very far away, and I don't know exactly where they are. As for how many people there are 34 of them in this area. Their positions are the same as mine, and each of them has their own herding area. Boar didn't hide anything and answered all the questions he knew. There was only one reason for this, and that was that the other party had a card up his sleeve. They regarded the two of them as dead people. All right, are you done with your questions? Boar asked. One last question. What are jade-waisted slaves? Renbachian asked again. As you can see, they are my possessions. They are very beautiful and taste very good. Boar praised them, but there wasn't a trace of emotion in his voice. The Empress couldn't take it anymore. Her aura erupted like a volcano, and in the blink of an eye, a huge mountain that couldn't be seen with the naked eye appeared in the valley. Not bad, Boar praised. Then he suddenly shouted, Chinfugue. His compound eyes turned green, just like the color of the wings of the jade-waisted slaves. In the center of the green eyes was a boundless darkness that seemed to suck in their souls. Renbachian suddenly screamed and fell to the ground. This unforeseen event startled the Empress. What's wrong with you? Boar was a little dumbfounded. This reaction wasn't right. Although Renbachian's reaction wasn't right, and he shouldn't have fallen to the ground, he only felt that something might have gone wrong. After being dumbfounded for a while, he asked curiously, So your name is Chen Fugue? Then is she Chen Ergu? Then his eyes turned green, and he shouted at the Empress, Chen Ergu. Chapter 765. The Empress raised her hand and struck, giving off the feeling of a mountain crashing down. She had an ordinary body, but her strike was earth-shattering. If it were someone else, they would have been scared out of their wits by this punch. However, Boar didn't seem to notice this. Instead, he asked doubtfully, Isn't your name Chen Ergu? His body floated backward. It looked light, but his speed was extremely fast. He floated to the stone wall outside the cave entrance. His back and legs rubbed against the mountain wall a few times. His whole body was like a gecko as he swam upwards. The Empress followed up with a punch and smashed the cave entrance. Boom. Dust flew everywhere. The entire cave entrance was smashed by the Empress from the side, following which she punched the top of the cave entrance. The cave entrance was completely blocked. Renbachian watched from afar and praised in his heart. In this way, the jade-waisted slaves couldn't come out. Boar was the only one left outside, and it was much easier to deal with. Boar noticed the Empress's movements, looked around, and asked, You're not Chen Fugue or Chen Ergu. What's your name? The Empress smashed the cave entrance and punched again and again. Boar swam along the mountain wall at an extremely fast speed, but he still stuck his back to the mountain wall as if he was glued to it. He rose to a height of 70 to 80 meters while the Empress chased after him step by step. The sound of the Empress's punches hitting the mountain wall was incessant. With each punch, the originally smooth mountain wall was filled with holes of various sizes, but it was full of footholds. The Empress didn't use a weapon, but her jade-like hands were comparable to any weapon. No matter who the enemy was, they would not be able to withstand her seemingly weak and boneless hands. However, Boar was from a different race and had been hiding all along, so it was hard to tell how strong he was. However, his speed was extremely fast, probably even faster than the Empress's current state. At least, no matter how much she chased after him, she was always a little behind. Furthermore, he was still swimming with his back against the mountain wall. Needless to say, it was obvious that his mind wasn't fully focused on the Empress's strength. Actually, her name is Wuxia, and I'm Joker. Renbachian said as he got up from the ground. Bor saw Renbachian and was immediately furious. You lied to me. Renbachian tilted his head. This guy probably didn't have much contact with people, so his brain wasn't working very well. However, when he thought about it, there were only about 30 people from his clan in this area, and they all had their own territories. Even if he wanted to interact with others, he wouldn't have the chance. I'm not lying to you. It's just that the two of us used to be called Chun Ergu and Chun Fugue, but later we found a master. The master felt that the name didn't sound good, so he changed our names. Her name is Wuxia. Nonsense. Once the name is set, it will be connected to one's aura. I called you and she did not respond. You two are lying to me. Bor said angrily. Renbachian didn't know that there was such a link. Names were actually related to chi activity. Thinking about it, it made sense. For example, if someone called your name, you would naturally think that the person was calling you, and your mind would definitely be moved. Coupled with something that you did not know, it would probably form the chi activity that the person was talking about. Why are you asking for our names? Renbachian asked. Wuxia. Bor's compound eyes shone brightly as he shouted at the Empress. What greeted him was the Empress's fist. You lied to me again. Bor was even angrier. Renbachian grinned. Why do you want to know our names? What kind of evil technique is that? Himfi naturally won't tell you. As Bor dodged the Empress's attack, he swallowed the words that he was about to blurt out. Seeing that he still had the energy to speak, the Empress became even angrier, and her face began to be covered with purple veins. In the blink of an eye, the veins began to extend from her face down to her entire body and toward her limbs. In just 2 breaths' time, the Empress's body was covered with purple veins, her eyes began to turn red, and her aura increased tremendously. Both her speed and strength had increased by more than 1 level. This time Bor could no longer relax. He didn't expect the Empress's strength to increase so much. He quickly put the piece of white bone in his mouth and wanted to play it. After a few short sounds, a rustling sound came from the cave. It sounded like something was rubbing against a rock. Seeing this, Renbachian wanted to touch the back of his waist. Unfortunately, he had come out with the Empress to relax and didn't bring anything. Even if he had brought a skunk bomb, it might not have any effect on those jade-waisted slaves. Renbachian looked worriedly at the 2 people who were moving so fast on the mountain wall that only their afterimages could be seen. He hoped that the Empress would be faster. The wings of those demonic butterflies were as sharp as steel blades. He didn't know if they had other abilities, but the cave entrance might not be blocked for long. Rumbling sounds were heard continuously on the mountain wall, and the places that the 2 people passed by exploded as if they were buried with explosives. Half of the stone wall was covered in dust, and Renbachian had to wave his hands to disperse the dust. Renbachian rolled his eyes and suddenly shouted, Bor, let's see if your eyes or my sleeves are more powerful. Do you dare to stop and respond when I call you? If you don't stop, I will respond. Bor couldn't help but reply to Renbachian while being chased by the Empress. Renbachian felt like laughing. Although this guy was an enemy, he was really silly and cute. If you don't stop, you won't be able to show off the power of my sleeves, Renbachian said. At this time, he was wearing a pair of Hawaiian-style pants and a long-sleeved t-shirt. The sleeves were very small, and he deliberately retracted his hands into the sleeves, leaving them empty and swaying in the air. If you ask her to stop, I will stop, Bor shouted. While he was talking, the Empress almost caught up to him. The broken stones hit his body, and his green skin turned purple. Damn it, Bor yelled. Then I will count to 1, 2, 3, and then both of you will stop together, Renbachian said. Okay, Boer quickly shouted. At this time, the rustling sound coming from the belly of the mountain became more obvious. 1, 2. Renbachian looked at the 2 people in the air and wondered if Bor would be stupid enough to stop. If that was the case, it would save him a lot of trouble. 3. As soon as the number 3 was said, boom. The 2 people in the air stopped almost at the same time. Bor was leaning against the wall and panting heavily. Meanwhile, the Empress was standing with 1 foot on the depression that she had created with her fist, and was glaring at Bor fiercely. Renbachian was stunned. Why did you stop, Your Majesty? The Empress glanced at Renbachian in the air with suppressed violence in her eyes that were as scarlet as blood. Renbachian looked at the Empress and then at Boar. He was a little confused. Hurry up and shout. Let's see if your sleeves or my eyes are more powerful. Boar shouted while leaning against the mountain wall. His breathing was a little rough. It seemed that besides being fast, this person wasn't very good in other aspects. At least his physical strength wasn't very good. Renbachian looked at the Empress again and almost wrote on his face, Your Majesty, why did you stop? However, he didn't say anything to remind her. If he did, he was afraid that Boar would run away again. Now he only hoped that the Empress could comprehend it quickly. Renbachian flicked his sleeves and said, Boar, answer me when I call you. Why wouldn't I dare? Boar panted heavily on the mountain wall. Boar! Renbachian shouted. I am. Do it. These two sentences were shouted almost at the same time. However, before Renbachian shouted, the Empress pounced over. With that sentence, I am. The Empress slapped Boar down from the mountain wall, as if she was swatting a fly. There was a burst of blood in the air. Half of Boar's body was smashed by the Empress. The Empress's hand was covered in blue blood. Chapter 766. Your Majesty, be careful. His blood isn't poisonous, right? Renbachian asked with concern as the Empress descended from the sky. The Empress raised her hand to look at her palm. She exerted force and shook off all the blue blood on the ground. Not a single trace was left. Then she said faintly, I'm fine. The Empress looked up at the cave that she had collapsed. Rustling sounds were still coming from inside, and there was only a thin layer of stone left. The Empress leaped up and slapped the cliff twice. A large amount of soil and stones came crashing down and tightly blocked the cave. No matter what, she couldn't let those jade-waisted slaves disturb her now. After doing this, the Empress and Renbachian looked at Boar, who had fallen to the ground. Half of his body had been smashed by the Empress, and he had fallen from a height of more than 100 meters. His blue blood was splattered everywhere. Boar was lying on the ground, but he wasn't dead yet. His chest was still rising and falling slightly. From the mutilations, it could be seen that Boar's body was very different from that of a human's. The thickness of his bones was much lower than that of a human's. Renbachian picked up a broken limb from the ground. It was unexpectedly light, and the muscle density was much lower than that of a human's. The weight of the bones mixed and was also very light. This was probably the reason why his body was so thin. Their bones couldn't support a heavy body. Such a body structure also gave them speed that far exceeded that of humans and beasts. Renbachian stepped forward and gave him a gentle kick. Boar turned his head slightly, and it was impossible to tell whether his compound eyes were open or closed. However, this movement of his head let them know that he was still awake. Tell us what we want to know. Your injury can still be cured. Renbachian said. You lied to me. Boar said with his lips wriggling. Sorry, I couldn't help but lie to you when I saw you. Renbachian laughed and sat down beside him. Why? Because you are too stupid. I haven't seen such a stupid person in a long time. Stupid? Boar murmured. This word was very unfamiliar to him. However, he understood the meaning of this word. You lied to me when you said that my injury can still be cured. Boar said. Renbachian laughed again. The other party was smart this time. In other words, he understood his own body very well. Half of his body was gone, and all the bones in his body were broken. If he could be saved, he would be a deity. However, Boar's voice was still very clear. It seemed that he could still hold on for a while. Why did you do those things? Renbachian asked. What is it? Those jade-waisted slaves. How did you guys manage to put them into the bodies of the ancient race beings? Why did you guys do that? Boar looked at Renbachian strangely and said, We are the herdsmen of the jade-waisted slaves. Why ask why? The jade-waisted slaves are our food and our weapons. The ancients are the easiest petri dishes to find, and the jade-waisted slaves raised by the ancients also taste the best. When the Water Empress heard this, her face turned cold again. So you deserve to die. Perhaps that's the case for you aboriginals. To other creatures, you deserve to die as well. Wasn't it natural to eat food to maintain life? It's only when you have wisdom, other thoughts, love and hate that you will feel that hurting your own people is worthy of death, Bo-er said softly. These words left the Empress and Renbachian speechless. Do you guys also have love and hate? Renbachian was very interested in this question. This was the second time he had seen a humanoid creature. The previous one only ate and slept and had no value as a reference. We do too. It's just that we're not like the Aboriginals. We give up our childhood memories when we grow up. This is because we have to survive on our own after we grow up. We release the jade-waisted slaves and only gather together during mating. Our childhood memories will make us feel lonelier and weaker when we live alone for a long period of time. Therefore, when we grow up, we give up our memories and embark on a journey to find a habitat. We give up our memories and also give up our love and hate. After hearing this, Renbachian looked up at the Empress and said softly, "For us, love and hate are the most beautiful things in our lives. If we give up on these, we are no different from those beasts." He then lowered his head and said, "You are about to be killed by us, but you can still talk to us calmly. Is it because you have given up love and hate? In my opinion, this is very sad. To kill or be killed, to eat other creatures or to be eaten by other creatures, these are all part of this world. Death is just a state. Although you killed me, you won't hate anything because of this. Or rather, I have forgotten my hatred," Bor murmured. "Why did you want to kill us when we found you?" Renbachian felt that this was very strange. Given the mentality that Bor was currently showing, why did he want to kill him and the Empress back then? "Because you would have killed us too. We used the Aboriginals as petri dishes, and you would also want to take revenge. I already knew this. The Aboriginals are such a race, or should I say, humans are such a race. How much do you know about humans?" Renbachian asked again. "I don't know. Every time I eat one, I will understand a little. Perhaps when I eat enough, I will understand." Bor's words made Renbachian's heart turn cold. This race could obtain information from eating the jade-waisted slaves that were cultivated using the Aboriginals as petri dishes? What do you mean? Renbachian quickly asked. "I'm tired. Although this is the first time I've spoken so much to someone, and will be the last time, I'm tired. I think I'm going to die," Bor murmured. "How do you obtain information from eating the jade-waisted slaves? Where are your people?" Bor's lips curled into a smile, and then he stopped talking. It was unknown where the focus of his compound eyes was. Is he still alive? Renbachian tentatively touched his heart, and found that it had stopped beating. Dead. Renbachian got up and felt a little regretful that he didn't finish his question. However, he still had his people. "By the way, can you put my body in the river?" Bor suddenly asked, startling Renbachian. He almost thought that he was a zombie. "Why?" "Because our race will return to the water after we die," Bor said. "I will wrap up your head, bring it back to Lan City, and suppress it under the palace. You will be suppressed there forever and wail in endless time," the Empress said coldly. "That's really a pity," Bor murmured. Renbachian felt that the light in his compound eyes dimmed. "You have learned what regret is," Renbachian said softly. However, there was no response. "I'm dead this time, right?" Renbachian sighed. He didn't expect to experience such things on this trip. However, it was a good thing that he finally knew who the enemy was. "Your Majesty, let me take the head," Renbachian said when he saw that the Empress was about to make a move. He couldn't let her do such a thing. It wouldn't look good. "Don't damage it." The Empress didn't care. "Understood." Renbachian squatted next to Bor's body and touched his neck. It was very thin and seemed like it would break with a twist. However, it was just a feeling. It wasn't difficult to break the neck, but twisting it off required more strength and skill. Renbachian thought about it, and a gold and silver spear appeared in his hand. He aimed the tip of the spear at Bor's neck, gestured to the side, and was about to stab it when the Empress suddenly said, "Wait." "What?" "Blood will spurt out from this position. The position where you are standing will be sprayed on your body," the Empress said faintly. "Has his blood flowed out?" Renbachian was surprised. The Empress shook her head and said, "There is still a lot of blood in his body, enough to splatter out. Then I will change my position. Renbaqian changed his position, took aim, and looked up at the Empress. Is this place okay? You can stab from the other side, turn half a circle, and cut off the neck. The artery is the last to be cut, and you can withdraw with the spear, the Empress pointed out. Understood. Renbaqian had a look of understanding. In such an environment, it would be weird for a fairy-like beauty to instruct a man on how to dismember a corpse. Renbaqian changed his position, and was about to strike when he suddenly thought of something. Actually, it's fine to bring his entire body back. We can send it back to the Messier 87 department for examination. After all, know yourself and know your enemy. Besides, there is no time to send the head back now. We can freeze it in the refrigerator and suppress it when we return to Lan City. The Empress thought about it and felt that it made sense. Just as she was about to nod, Boar, who was lying on the ground, sighed with an inexplicable emotion and said, "Both of you, hurry up and do it. I have been waiting for a long time." Chapter 767. With a shake of his hand, Renbaqian stuck the spear into Boar's neck. He had done this before, but this time, it felt particularly weird. He calmed down, pressed the spear in his hand to the other side, and Boar's head fell off. Despite the Empress's warning, blue blood still splattered on Renbaqian's leg. However, at this moment, Boar's corpse suddenly sat up, and Renbaqian thought that it was going to turn into a zombie again. However, Boar's body sat there, twitching twice, and then fell down again. He should be dead this time. Renbaqian was speechless. Boar's vitality was really tenacious. It was almost the same as some insects. Hopefully, it wouldn't be like an earthworm that was cut into two halves and grew out separately. Renbaqian picked up Boar's head and sized it up. Unfortunately, he still couldn't see anything from its compound eyes. This time, there was no need to test its breathing. Boar's head had fallen off, so it would be strange if it was still breathing. Renbaqian previously thought that Boar's head was made of hair, but now that he picked it up, he realized that the messy grass growing on Boar's head was actually like skin. It was a little elastic and was completely different from hair. It was also a little coarser than hair. However, at this moment, Boar's facial muscles moved again. Renbaqian almost threw the head away. "Can you hug me? This is actually uncomfortable. You're grabbing my genitals." Boar's remaining head suddenly spoke. Pow! Renbaqian directly smashed his head to the ground. Renbaqian was furious. Was there no end to this? Again and again? Are you a zombie? Do you go out with your genitals on every day? Then why are you wearing this animal skin shirt? There were too many things to complain about. It was so many that Renbaqian didn't know how to react. Why aren't you dead yet? This is my last moment. Without a body, my head won't be able to hold on for long. Boar said faintly with half of his face pressed against the soil. If I didn't chop off your head just now, would you still be alive? Renbaqian felt that he and the Empress were almost deceived by him. This guy looked like he had thick eyebrows and big eyes. He wasn't a good person either. I won't survive, but I can hold on for 2 more days, Boar said. Renbaqian looked at him suspiciously. Only his head was left, yet he could still speak. The remaining half of his body could only last for 2 more days? I'm not human, so I can't lie, Boar said again. Renbaqian, you probably don't have any misunderstandings about humans. He glanced at the Empress, lifted her head with the tip of his spear, and carried her corpse with his other hand. On the other hand, the Empress turned around and smashed another part of the mountain wall, to ensure that the jade-waisted slaves wouldn't be able to escape anytime soon. Only then did the two of them return to the valley where the Earth-Een spring was located. At the entrance of the valley, he saw a few winged cavalry warriors doing something with a wooden pipe. What are you doing? The Empress asked in a deep voice. Your Majesty. They quickly stood up. When they saw the heads and corpses that he was carrying, they immediately became serious and asked, Are there enemies? Wake him up and follow me, the Empress said with a sullen face. Yes. Everyone hurriedly got busy. Renbaqian threw the heads and corpses aside. Boar didn't speak again along the way, but Renbaqian wasn't sure if he was dead or not. Standing at the side, he watched as the soldiers passed by. They were sucking on the wooden pipes in their hands from time to time, but he didn't know what they were sucking on. What's this? Let me see. Renbaqian stopped one of the winged cavalry warriors and asked. Yes, sir, it's a scorpion pipe. The winged cavalry warrior quickly handed over the wooden pipe. Only then did Renbaqian notice that it was a slightly larger wooden pipe with something burning inside. There was also a thin wooden pipe inserted from the side. Sir, just suck on this, the winged cavalry warrior said as he pointed at the thin pipe inserted into the pipe and ran away. Renbaqian didn't know what it was, but he felt that it was somewhat like a tobacco pipe from Earth. Could it be that there was tobacco in this world? After wiping the saliva off the pipe, he took a gentle puff and felt an incomparably fragrant smell rush into his mouth. Following which, he felt a little dizzy. Renbaqian was startled. This feeling immediately reminded him of that jar of golden ring honey. That thing almost caused big trouble. However, this thing wasn't as strong as the golden ring honey. He only felt a little dizzy, but he recovered immediately. Renbaqian tilted the wooden pipe downward, and immediately poured out some plants that had been burned into white ashes, as well as a lump of black and red stuff. After pulling it twice, Renbaqian realized that it was actually a scorpion. This group of people was actually sucking on a scorpion. They burned the scorpion in the wooden pipe, and used another thin pipe to suck on the fragrance inside. The dizziness made Renbaqian suspect that this scorpion might be poisonous. The dizziness was caused by the scorpion's poison burning. Wait here. I'll take them to deal with those jade-wasted slaves, the Empress said as she walked over. Be careful, Your Majesty, Renbaqian said. Although this was nonsense. Both of them had walked this path once, so there wouldn't be any danger. However, this kind of nonsense had always been what the Empress liked to hear. In everyone's eyes, she was the most powerful Empress. Therefore, other than Renbaqian, no one else would say such nonsense to her. The Empress nodded and left with her people, leaving only Renbaqian, Qingyuan, and Hongwuan here. Renbaqian threw the scorpion pipe aside, and poked Boar's head with the handle of the spear. Principal Run, what is this? Qingyuan jumped over and asked in a crisp voice. Boar's eyes were compound eyes that were different from those of humans. They were made up of countless visual units and looked like Ultraman, which made Qingyuan very curious. Lift him up by his hair and see if he's still alive. Renbaqian said. How can he still be alive? His head has been chopped off. If he's still alive. Oh. Qingyuan casually said as she grabbed Boar's genitals on his head and lifted him up. Renbaqian wanted to hear what she would do. Then he would look at how Boar's sudden words startled her. However, Boar didn't respond this time, and it seemed like he was really dead. Principal Ren, you haven't told me what this is. Where did Her Majesty go? Qingyuan asked in a crisp voice. Hongwuan also came over. They can be considered enemies of the Aboriginals, Renbaqian said after some thought. It was hard to say whether they were enemies since they were actually just predators. He took out some milk candy from his bag and distributed it to the other two. The three of them sat there and ate the candy as if they were chatting while eating melon seeds. After that, Renbaqian briefly told them about what happened this time. So it was them. Those bastards. The two of them knew that the jade-wasted slaves were created by them and immediately cursed angrily. However, they couldn't come up with any curse words. Her Majesty will definitely not let them off. Renbaqian believed in this. Chapter 768. Renbaqian originally thought that everyone would be back before daybreak. In the end, it was already daybreak by the time he returned to the shore after cultivating in the water. However, there were still no traces of them. Renbaqian lay beside the bonfire and started to ponder. Could something have happened? Those jade-wasted slaves might be difficult to deal with, but with the Empress around, there shouldn't be any problems. Renbaqian still trusted the Empress. This was especially so when the Empress already knew the actual strength of the other party. After resting for a moment, he got up and cooked a pot of meat soup. After drinking it, he went back into the water to cultivate. Qingyuan and Hongwuan couldn't wait any longer, and went to the entrance of the valley to wait. After noon, Renbaqian started to feel a little anxious and wondered if he should go and look for them. At this moment, Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan's shouts came from outside the valley. "They are back! He's back!" Renbaqian was finally relieved. He sat there and slowly cooked the meat soup. After waiting for a while, everyone entered the valley. Renbaqian took a closer look and saw that the Empress, who was in the lead, was fine. Many of the winged cavalry warriors at the back were injured. The most important thing was the number of people. Renbaqian did a head count and found that 8 people were missing. "Your Majesty, drink some soup first." Renbaqian scooped a bowl of soup for the Empress. After seeing her raise her head and drink it in one gulp, he asked, "Did you encounter any trouble this time?" The Empress's face immediately turned cold. "Those jade-waisted slaves are indeed powerful. Fortunately, I sealed those jade-waisted slaves in the cave yesterday. Otherwise, I might not have been able to take down that herdsman." Renbaqian's heart trembled. Those jade-waisted slaves, who had no one to command them, had injured so many people under the Empress's watch, and 8 winged cavalry warriors had died. If there was someone commanding them, they would have to pay a huge price to wipe out the 30 herdsmen. Obviously, this was also what the Empress was worried about. The news that Zidonglai had conquered the Yun nation's capital only made everyone happy for half a day. However, the appearance of the herdsmen and the jade-waisted slaves made everyone tense up again. After everyone rested for a while, the Empress sent everyone out to the family village to contact the winged cavalry warriors who had gone to recruit. There were more than 30 herdsmen, and the Empress's subordinates weren't enough to deal with them. The rest of the people went to look for the winged cavalry warriors, Gongzheng and Lin Xiaola. If they encountered the herders, these people might not be able to return. "Your Majesty, did you bring back the corpses of the jade-waisted slaves?" Renbaqian asked. "I will bring them back to see if I can find their weaknesses." At present, he only knew that herdsmen were extremely fast and could use their names to perform some tricks. As long as they were on guard, there wouldn't be too much danger. No matter how fast the herdsmen were, their bodies weren't strong. The biggest threat was the tens of thousands of jade-waisted slaves. The results this time also proved this point. The Water Empress frowned and shook her head. "After the demonic butterflies die, they will shrink into a ball and disintegrate into ashes." As she spoke, the Empress glanced at Renbaqian and swallowed her words. On the way back, she had been thinking for a long time. Whether it was the fact that the jade-waisted slaves had the appearance of their host or that they would turn into ashes after death, she felt that the jade-waisted slaves had something to do with divine souls. If there was a technique that specialized in attacking the soul, it would probably have a great effect on the jade-waisted slaves. Unfortunately, the ancient race was not good at this. Renbaqian, on the other hand, had a chance with his technique. However, he was still very far from this step. "In that case, I'll go back and see how the Messier 87 is doing with the unformed corpses of the jade-waisted slaves," Renbaqian said and returned to Earth. After 16 hours, he came back with 2 wooden boxes in his hands. "What are these?" The Empress perked up and asked. "Are there any results from the research?" "There aren't any results. However, I did bring something back," Renbaqian said with a strange look on his face. The Empress looked at him with a puzzled expression. "Are these for dealing with the jade-waisted slaves?" She and Renbaqian had the same idea on this point. "Yes. What are the effects?" the Empress asked again. "I don't know." Renbaqian was speechless. As soon as he returned, he hurried to the Messier 87 department. When he was about to leave, he received these things which made him curse out loud. He never expected that the Messier 87 department would actually give him such things. Insecticide. Of course, it was a special insecticide. Although the Messier 87 department hadn't made much progress with the demonic butterfly corpses, they had researched something and produced a special insecticide. As for the effects, no one knew. After all, there weren't any living things to experiment on. The Messier 87 department had only done some research and determined that some things might be effective on them. After listening to Renbaqian, the Empress wasn't disappointed. At least she could give it a try. Wait for them to come back. Continue to practice. Renbaqian nodded, took off his clothes, jumped into the water, and continued to practice. After 5 days, the winged cavalry warriors began to come back one after another. However, they didn't stay long before setting off to hunt in the distance. Food was a big problem here. However, as some people came back and some went hunting, the valley could always maintain around 70 to 80 people, which made it a lot livelier. Renbaqian also found some time to go back to Earth and bring back the second-generation insecticide. In addition to killing insects, it also had a volatile and flammable effect. Half a month passed, and Renbaqian had been practicing in the pond for nearly 2.5 months. It seemed that with the repeated struggle between the cold and heat, as well as the recovery of the essence qi in his body, there were some unexpected changes to his body surface and muscles. His body had grown even bigger. In just 10 days, his body had become thicker, as if he had been blown up. At a glance he was 175 meters tall, and weighed at least 150 kilograms. Furthermore, all of his muscles were bulging. He was almost the type that strangers didn't want to get close to. If one stood among the aboriginals, they wouldn't be able to distinguish him from afar. However, one would be able to see him when they got closer. After all, his face was much fairer than the aboriginals. Renbaqian was somewhat aware of this change. The first step was almost complete. What was left was to strip a portion of the essence qi from the circulation of the internal organs and hammer it into the surface of the body and muscles. When this step was completed, his defense would be greatly enhanced. At the very least, he wouldn't be seriously injured by a casual punch from the Empress. He would then be able to enter the bridal chamber with peace of mind. However, the Empress's expression was extremely ugly at this moment. It wasn't just her. All the winged cavalry warriors in the valley looked grave. 15 days had passed, and there were still some people who hadn't returned. This included the 3 groups and the people who went to look for them. There was no news at all. The furthest direction that these people had explored was a journey of 6 days. Among these 3 groups, one of them was Gong Zheng and Lin Xiaola. Your Majesty, with Lin Xiaola's speed, she should be fine. Renbaqian came out of the earth-ean spring, picked up a bath towel, and wiped his body before walking to the Empress's side. The Empress's expression turned cold, and she remained silent. Lin Xiaola's speed was indeed fast, but those herdsmen weren't slow either. The most important thing was whether the 2 of them had fallen for other tricks. For example, their real names. If Renbaqian hadn't spouted nonsense that day, he probably wouldn't have known that he had fallen for the other party's tricks. Chapter 769. As more than 15 days passed, everyone's worries grew heavier with each passing day. With each passing day, the probability of those who didn't receive any news coming back was lower. Every day, someone guarded a mountain pass that was 1 day's journey away. That was the only way back, but unfortunately, there was no news from them. Renbaqian gradually couldn't laugh anymore. Although Lin Xiaola only knew how to eat and sleep, she was still quite an interesting little girl. She accompanied him to the north and south, escorted him to Z City and Tianjing Basin. Although she didn't contribute much, she still spent a lot of time with Renbaqian. Other than the Empress and the guards around him, Lin Xiaola had been by his side the longest. If she were to die here, even though Renbaqian had died so many times and was indifferent to life and death, he would still feel that it was a pity. After spending so much time together, there would always be some feelings. Even though Lin Xiaola always slept and didn't make her presence felt. While everyone waited for news, Renbaqian persisted in his training. After another 5 days, the essence energy in Renbaqian's body began to be tempered into his skin and muscles. As a result, he needed to eat a lot of food every day to replenish his essence energy. If he had to describe it, it would probably be the feeling of eating ginseng, pylos antler, sea cucumber, and wolfberry to nourish his body. Every day, he had to eat 3 man-wheel-level beasts, transform them into essence energy, and then temper them into his skin to experience the feeling of emptiness. Then he would climb ashore and continue eating. This kind of feeling was really not a good one. However, as the essence energy was tempered into his skin and muscles step by step, Renbaqian's skin began to become denser. The hair on his body began to fall off, including his hair and other parts of his body. This gave Rinpoche a shock. My bird is bald. This is a big deal. Some people say that nothing matters except life and death. Nonsense. Rinpoche felt that many things were more important than life and death. In addition to being bald, Rinpoche's skin began to become as silky as milk. As he stood there, his body reflected a faint light like metal. The valley was always dim and didn't have a strong light, so it wasn't too conspicuous. However, when Rinpoche returned to Earth, this problem was completely exposed. After staying for 5 days, Rinpoche returned to Earth. The first thing he did was change his clothes. He stood in front of the dressing mirror and realized that he simply didn't recognize the person opposite him. After the sunlight from the window spilled into the room, the mirror reflected a bald head that shone like a light bulb, and that skin that was radiating a strong luster. It was as if a layer of oil had been smeared on it. A 300 kilograms fat and strong man with a body full of exquisite skin that reflected the light. Just thinking about it was enough. Rinpoche winked in front of the mirror for a long time. In the end, his face drooped. With his current appearance, he couldn't even leave the house now. He sighed and went downstairs. It was currently autumn on Earth. The 12-winged cavalry warriors were bored in the courtyard and were using large boulders as exercise equipment. Seeing someone push open the door and come out, everyone first took a look, and then they were all shocked. "Lady Boss, you lit up." His accent sounded like, "Lady Boss, you're cold." Rinpoche raised his arm. Sure enough, under the direct sunlight, his entire arm was reflecting light. It gave people the feeling that it was glowing. If even his arm looked like this, there was no need to think about how others looked at him. Although there was still a considerable gap compared to the reflection of metal, this kind of situation was eye-catching enough when it appeared on a human body. He was simply a man with a halo, a body that glowed under the sunlight. Rinpoche sighed, turned around, and went back into the house. He first called Yang Sun to find out about the progress of the research on the jade-waisted slaves. After a while, he went out of the house, summoned his golden spear, and practiced for a long time. After waiting for 2 days, he returned to Dayo with the 3rd-generation insecticide. As soon as he landed, he opened his eyes and saw the solemn faces of everyone. Still not back. Rinpoche swallowed this sentence that was on the tip of his tongue. He could tell just by looking at everyone's expressions. It had already been 21 days. It seemed like those people were really in trouble. That included the girl who was always sleeping and drooling in Qingxin Palace Hall. She had a delicate appearance and a pair of A's. At the thought of this, Rinpoche's mood worsened. He turned his head and decided to practice martial arts. After another 5 days, Rinpoche felt that he had changed from a matte to a high gloss. The surface of his skin seemed to be covered with a layer of film. As long as he gave himself a layer of light, he would be able to shine. He was like an unparalleled superstar. At this point, everyone no longer had any expectations for Gongzheng and Lin Xiaola. Everyone was filled with pent-up anger and was ready to avenge Gongzheng. Now they were waiting for the people who had gone to the Ye family village to return. After a few days, everyone was sent out again. This time, the task given by the Empress was to look for jade-waisted slaves in the mountains at night. If they found any, they were to immediately retreat and never approach them. After another 5 days, Rinpoche felt that he could change his name to Golden Glitter. "Why are you frowning?" The Empress saw that Rinpoche's face was twitching. Even though she was in a bad mood recently, she still softened her tone and asked, "I never thought that I would be so bright after practicing this technique." Rinpoche expressed his bewilderment. The Empress sized him up. In fact, anyone who wasn't blind could see his situation. It couldn't be more appropriate to say that he would shine brightly if given some sunlight. "It's all right. There wasn't much difference from before," the Empress said. Rinpoche silently took out a flashlight and shone it on his face. Suddenly his face lit up. "Your Majesty, are you serious?" The Empress thought about it. She wanted to say it was true, but she couldn't bring herself to say something that went against her heart because of her moral integrity. She said softly, "It's pretty good. My husband should be a radiant man." Rinpoche pondered for a while and said with a proud expression, "Radiant man? Do you mean this kind of radiant man? You can say that. The Empress sat on a rock and looked down. She hugged Rinpoche's neck and pulled him closer to her. Then she lowered her head and kissed his forehead. She then pushed Rinpoche further away and carefully sized him up. She smiled and said, "This is pretty good." Rinpoche sighed and said, "Yes, the next time there are assassins, there's no need to look for a target. It's definitely right to attack the brightest one." Librarian Lin never mentioned this before, and he didn't expect it at all. Who would have thought that this technique would have such a side effect? Rinpoche only hoped that this was only half the effect of practicing this technique, and that it would return to its original state after completing the first stage. In addition, Rinpoche's defense had indeed increased greatly. Previously, he could make a cut with a knife, but now, it was as if he was cutting an iron plate and only left a mark on his skin. Rinpoche gave himself a hard punch and felt that the force of that punch had been dispersed to a large area of his body surface. The essence energy that had been hammered into the surface of his body had fused with his cells and connected them together. When one cell was attacked, the surrounding cells would disperse the force. A blow that could slightly injure him in the past didn't feel much now. It was like being pushed in the face. A blow that could seriously injure him in the past still seriously injured him now. After all, the essence energy that had been hammered into the surface of his body was limited, and the amount of attack that could be sustained was also limited. In other words, if an expert who was far more powerful than Rinpoche wanted to kill him, it wouldn't be any different from before. The damage caused to Rinpoche by an expert of the same level would be greatly reduced. If it was an expert who was weaker than Rinpoche, they might have been able to injure him by surprise in the past. Now it could at most be considered a massage. Chapter 770. Rinpoche felt that his wedding would probably have to be postponed. His wedding with the Empress was getting closer and closer. Of the 9 months, 7 months had already passed. It was already late January in Dayo's 73rd year, and there was still 1.5 months before the wedding. Rinpoche had already completed the first stage of his training. His whole body was still illuminated, and even his forehead was glowing. His original hope of returning to a matte look had been dashed, and he had no choice but to apply a layer of foundation, the kind used by women to put on makeup. This made the situation a little better. However, it was fine if he didn't exercise intensely, but if he did, the foundation would immediately fall off. According to Rinpoche, even a mosquito that landed on his forehead would slip. This wasn't an adjective. "Your Majesty, it's about time, right?" Rinpoche casually asked as he sat beside the Empress. The 150-kilogram man was holding a mirror in one hand and applying powder to his face with the other. Unfortunately, as he spoke, the powder fell off as he applied it. After a few minutes, Rinpoche lost his patience and threw the mirror away. The Empress nodded. The people who went to the Ya family village had been gone for 2 months, and it was about time for them to return. "Are there 7 people who have been identified?" Rinpoche placed his hands on the ground and rested his head on the thigh of the Empress, who was sitting on a rock. The veil fell to one side, and the back of Rinpoche's head touched the Empress's skin. Rinpoche felt that it was very slippery. It wasn't the Empress's leg that was slippery, but the back of his head that was slippery. "There are 8, the Empress said. Recently, the Empress had sent people out to investigate separately. Including the locations of the 3 missing teams, they had only found the locations of 8 herdsmen. The 60,000 mountains were too big. This area was too big. During this process, the winged cavalry suffered more than 20 casualties. Only a few of them died at the hands of the herdsmen. Most of them died under the claws of various beasts in the mountains. Even the winged cavalry, who were at the earthwill level, were at great risk in an unfamiliar area. I hope they won't notice and gather together." Rinpoche frowned. One herdsman was already very difficult to deal with. If all of them gathered together, it would be a disaster. They should have noticed it. However, there aren't any signs of them gathering at the moment. At least, this seems to be the case from the surveillance of the 8 herdsmen. The Empress placed her hand on the top of Rinpoche's head. "Kill by touching the head." Even though it looked a little weird to others, He felt that it felt pretty good. They are used to traveling alone. Before encountering an absolutely powerful force, they probably won't gather together, Rinpoche guessed. Some of the characteristics of this race could be seen from some of Boer's words. Natural, wild, cruel, cold and lonely. Everyone had to use certain methods to forget their childhood after they reached adulthood, to prevent childhood memories from affecting their lonely and long lives in the future. Has the emperor of the Yun nation been sent to Lan City? Rinpoche asked. Yes, he wanted to escape, but Zidonglai caught him and sent him to Lan City a few days ago. As for that Zheng Qingmian, he set himself on fire. It is said that someone heard him scolding the warlords for surrendering without a fight while he was burning himself. The Empress said as she recalled Zidonglai's report. A wise man submits to circumstances. Rinpoche laughed. Moreover, he might have contributed to the surrender of those people. Speaking of which, Zheng Qingmian also contributed a lot. If Zheng Qingmian hadn't forced them and held them back from the beginning, the Yun nation wouldn't have been able to conquer the Yun nation so quickly. Speaking of which, the people of the Yun nation still benefited. Rinpoche continued. In the future, when Dayo develops, I still want to implement a household registration system. This will prevent the people of Great Xia and the Chen nation from coming over. To be a citizen of Dayo, one has to spend a sum of money to buy an identity first. How's the resistance from the Yin nation now? 2 of the warlords who surrendered were killed. They were assassinated by practitioners. The Empress said. Zidonglai killed 7 or 8 of the sects in the vicinity, which should be enough to deter a group of people. We have to use both kindness and authority. I'm afraid that just killing people won't be enough. Rinpoche said. It's fine to let him kill people, but forget about these things. Let's deal with it this way for now. After all, it's beyond our control now. We'll deal with the Yun nation after we return. The Empress said faintly. Although there was a radio station, it could only handle some ordinary matters. The current situation in the Yun nation was complicated, and it was difficult to deal with it solely by relying on the radio station. According to the Empress's plan, she would personally go to the Yun nation after her wedding. On one hand, she would inspect the mines, and on the other hand, she would deal with the rebels in the Yun nation. That night, a desolate horn sound was heard from afar. The sound of the horn was desolate and long, extremely deep, and moved people's hearts. As soon as it entered the ears, it made people's souls follow the sound of the horn and pass through the mountains of the wilderness. The people who were still in the valley were immediately invigorated. After a while, another horn sound came from the entrance of the valley. However, this sound was much weaker and didn't have the same soul-stirring feeling. It was completely incomparable to the sound of the horn in the distance. He's finally here. Rinpoche got up and stretched. This horn sound. Brother is here. The Empress frowned. She hadn't heard this sound for a long time, and there weren't many horns that could make this sound. This was the only one that the Empress had ever heard. It was Qi Ziding's most beloved item. Rinpoche welcomed the arrival of his brother-in-law. Although Qi Ziding's legs were broken, he was still a top-notch expert. Even if he was disabled, he still wasn't someone that ordinary people could compare to. An expert like him would be a great help in the elimination of the herdsmen. After another 2 hours, everyone heard a shout coming from afar. Where's Zixiao? A loud voice shouted from outside the valley. The Empress got up from the rock, tidied her clothes, and sat back down. Tidying her clothes was for the sake of her appearance. She sat back down because she was the Empress. There was no reason for an Empress to welcome other people. A figure broke through the air and appeared beside the 2 of them. Qi Ziding stuck his walking stick into the soil and carefully looked at the Empress. Seeing that she was the same as always, he smiled and said, I heard that you encountered some trouble, so I brought reinforcements. The Empress got up and said, Thank you. Ha, I don't like hearing this. Qi Ziding grinned. I heard some of the details. Tell me more. Qi Ziding said with a serious expression. How many people did you bring? The Empress asked. The winged cavalry recruited more than 2,000 people a few days ago, but it's not easy to transport food here. As you know, it's not easy to get food in the mountains. I picked 1,000 of the strongest people and mobilized people from 7 or 8 villages to transport food. However, I brought 2 cardinal heaven experts with me. Their village isn't too far from the Ye family village. If I had more time, I would have been able to find more people. Qi Ziding felt a little regretful. When he was investigating the route that the previous emperor took, he got to know many experts in the 60,000 mountains. They are indeed strong reinforcements. The Empress was relieved to hear that there were 2 cardinal heaven experts. Including her and Qi Ziding, there were 4 cardinal heaven experts. There were also more than 1,200 Kismet heaven experts. In this way they were strong enough. While the 2 of them were talking, a large number of people poured into the valley. Many of them had tattoos on their bodies and wore clothes made of animal skins. Some of them had bird feathers on their heads, some had beast horns on their necks, and some had fangs on their necks. Ren Baqian even saw some of them wearing shrunken beast skulls. The mounts they rode on were also of all shapes and sizes. There were saber-toothed tigers, black, white, and even red. It was a giant bird like the crow general, but its feathers were bright and shiny, and its eyes shone brightly as it looked around. There were creatures that looked like leopards, but they were much bigger and had 3 horns on their heads. There was also a giant 2-headed snake. Rinpoche even saw people riding giant spiders. Ba Man and Xiongyu pay their respects to your majesty. The 2 people in front were 2 meters tall and had the body of a bear. They exuded an extremely strong aura. Upon seeing the Empress, they cupped their fists and bowed. Sheng Yong from Pingshan village pays his respects to your majesty. Sheng Tian from Pingshan village pays his respects to your majesty. Hu Dalan from the 3rd village on Mount Kaiyang. Xie Yang from the 3rd village on Mount Kaiyang. More than 1,000 people got off their mounts and bowed at the same time. It was a mess. Except for the first few words, Ren Baqian couldn't hear the rest. Push a book called Real Estate Players. Chapter 771. Although these 1,000 people had just been recruited by the winged cavalry, they didn't have much awareness of becoming soldiers. They spoke in unison, one louder than the other, as if they were afraid that the Empress couldn't hear them. Coupled with the fact that they were from different mountains and villages, Ren Baqian felt that this scene was like the 36 caves and 72 islands paying a visit to Mount Tianshan. Or rather, it was more appropriate to say that there were 1,080 heroes in Liangshan. They gave off the vibe of a true hero. All of you shut up. Qi Ziding turned his head and shouted. Everyone immediately quieted down. Qi Ziding's prestige in the hearts of these people was quite high. Even though he was crippled, there wasn't a single Cardinal Heaven expert within 500 kilometers who hadn't been beaten up by him. This kind of prestige was earned through fighting. What did I teach you all along the way? Do you all not learn from your mistakes? Qi Ziding scolded with a black face. Along the way, Qi Ziding had already divided them into teams with the winged cavalry captain in charge. However, it became a mess once they entered the valley. Now that they saw Qi Ziding's black face, there was chaos again. They gathered together in groups and were divided into a few teams. Ren Baqian watched from the side and couldn't be bothered to say anything. The discipline of these aboriginals couldn't be compared to that of the modern army. Don't expect this group of brute force and simple-minded people to have much discipline. Even the army was like that, let alone these aboriginals. Those from Mount Gongmu, come over here. Coming. The name of this mountain was outstanding, and the voices of these people stood out from the crowd as well. They were actually the crisp voices of women. A few empresses emerged from the crowd. They were all in their teens and 20s, had bronze skin, and wore animal skin clothes that tightly wrapped around their exquisite bodies. They looked healthy and wild. Each of them had a few tail feathers on their heads. The colorful birds that Ren Baqian saw just now were the birds that they were riding on. Gongyang, Gongyu, Gongxing, Gongshan, of Mount Gongmu's Shochuan village greets your majesty. A few of the women came forward to greet them and curiously sized up the Empress from the corner of their eyes. This was the most distinguished woman in Dayo. The one holding the bird, come out too. Qi Ziding shouted. Soon after, another person came out of the crowd. It was a man in his 20s holding a chubby, round, and charmingly naive owl in his arms. Li Bai of Ligang Mountain greets your majesty. These people are good at searching. When I heard about the situation, I asked someone to call them over. Qi Ziding said to the Empress. Thank you, elder brother. She then looked at the rest of them and said, since all of you are carrying feathered species, you must have a way of communicating with them, right? Show me. When the women heard this, they flipped over and jumped down from the big birds. They patted the birds' wings a few times and made a goo-goo sound from their throats. The birds flapped their wings and flew into the sky. When the bird rose into the sky, the few of them reached out to grab its claws and hung from its body, following the bird as it flew higher and higher. Soon he disappeared into the darkness. Li Bai, on the other hand, released a similar cooing sound from his throat. Then, with a push of his hands, he released the fat owl in his arms. The owl was so fat that Rinpochian was worried for it as it flapped its two short wings. It swayed in the air, and seemed like it would fall at any time. After flapping its wings for a long time, it finally used all its strength to fly into the air. After spinning for less than a minute, it fell back into Li Bai's arms. It was as if a meteorite had fallen to the ground. Rinpochian felt the ground tremble slightly. Li Bai's feet were almost stuck in the ground. The owl said, "Goo goo goo goo." Li Bai said, "Your Majesty, there's a great earth mouse 100 meters away in that direction. Your Majesty, you can get someone to check it out." "There's no need to check," Rinpochian replied. Looking at the direction he was pointing, he knew that it was the roaring emperor. However, he was still a little worried and asked, "How long can this bird fly for?" "A full 5 minutes." Li Bai said proudly as he stretched out 4 fingers. The owl also raised its head and looked very proud. Goo goo goo. Rinpochian's face twitched. A bird that expended so much energy could only fly for 5 minutes? What were the two of them so proud of? As for whether the time it took to brew a cup of tea was 4 or 5 minutes, Rinpochian couldn't be bothered to complain. In any case, the mathematics of the Aboriginals was taught by the physical education teacher. The physical education teacher was confused. The women from Mount Gongmu flew into the sky and landed after a few minutes. "Your Majesty, there's a great earth mouse in that direction." In the distance, the roaring emperor popped its head out of the pit. "How long can you guys scout in the air?" Rinpochian asked again. A few of them looked at Rinpochian curiously, and felt that his body had a delicate luster in the night. It was as if his body could emit light, which made them feel very amorous. He was the most eye-catching when we were in the sky just now. No matter how far he was, we could see him. He looked so attractive. Their eyes twinkled. One of the wild women even winked at Rinpochian. 2 hours. 15 minutes less than her. 15 minutes less than her. 30 minutes less than her. Rinpochian knew with a glance that how long they could scout in the air was completely based on their weight. The lighter the weight, the less burden the big bird had, and the longer it could scout in the air. The longest they could scout in the air was 2 hours. The shortest was 1 hour plus 30 minutes, which was 1.5 hours. They were much more reliable than that owl. "How far can you guys see?" "Let Her Majesty and this sir know that the women of Mount Gongmu are best at eyesight. During the reign of the late emperor, the commander of the scouts was an ancestor of Mount Gongmu. We can see as far as the colorful eagle can see." One of the women pursed her lips and smiled. There are male and female springs on Mount Gongmu. The women grow up drinking the female spring, so their eyesight is extremely good, 10 times better than that of ordinary people. Qi Ziding said. He was very familiar with the situation of the villages in this area. "I see. It's indeed very useful. You guys will follow the army and scout in the next few days. After this, you will be rewarded according to your contributions," the Empress said to the 5 of them. "Your Majesty, this owl of mine must eat the crown snake. The crown snake is unique to this mountain, so it's difficult for it to leave," Li Bai said. "Without us in the village, they will starve. This time, Senior Qi summoned us to help your Majesty. After this, we still have to return to the village." The 5 of them shook their heads and didn't seem to want to leave the 60,000 mountains. The Empress wasn't angry at their rejection. She was rather tolerant of these aboriginals. Since you guys don't want to leave, I won't force you. Follow the army and scout in the next few days. I will reward you later, the Empress said. In fact, drones could be used to scout in a large army battle. Rinpoche's drones had made a lot of contributions to Hongwu and Zedonglai. Therefore, the Empress didn't care too much. On the contrary, it was more convenient for these people to be in the mountains. After getting them to rest, the Empress told Qi Ziding about the situation over the past few days. After listening, Qi Ziding muttered, "Previously, when I was looking for the route of the late emperor, I found some empty villages with many of the items left behind. I felt it was strange. It turned out that they were behind this. These herdsmen must not be left alive." Then he looked at the two of them and said, "Xiaoya, your wedding date is approaching. Leave the matters here to me." Then he glared at Rinpoche and said, "It's your great fortune to marry Xiaoya. If you do anything to her in the future, I will show you how I deal with people." After he finished speaking, he grinned and revealed his white teeth. Rinpoche felt as if he had smelled blood. It was as if he was facing a ferocious beast that was going to devour him. The Empress snorted and said, "I can't leave. Do you think I'm crippled now? That I can't even deal with these bastards?" Qi Ziding turned hostile faster than flipping a page. "I'm the Empress. These herdsmen feed on the aboriginals. How can I leave so easily?" The Empress didn't give in and looked at him coldly. Chapter 772. That night, the Empress asked someone to draw a rough map. It was indeed very rough. She just marked the positions of the herdsmen and marked up, down, left, and right. After that, she drew out a few lines and marked 5 days, 6 days, 8 days, and 14 days. These were the positions of the herdsmen that she had discovered so far. A few days of travel was a few days. As for the other mountains and rivers, there was none. It was more like a graffiti than a map. There was no difference between this map and not having it. After studying the map for 30 seconds, the Empress pointed to a location and said, "Let's go there first." Rinpoche took a look and saw that it was a location that was 5 days away. There was another location that was about the same distance. However, they would reach the location where Gong Zheng and the others had gone missing in 2 days. It seemed like the Empress still valued Lin Xiaola and the captain of the winged cavalry. After determining the direction, the next step was easy. The 600 winged cavalry warriors and the 1,000 people that were recruited now had a total of 1,600 Kismet Heaven experts. After setting off the next day, she organized these experts and the winged cavalry along the way. In addition to the 300 winged cavalry warriors as the vanguard, the other 300 winged cavalry warriors would each lead 3 new soldiers. This way, they could integrate the troops quickly and form a certain combat strength. However, this also delayed the speed of their journey. After all, even though these new soldiers were strong, they were still lacking in terms of military discipline and had a lot to learn. With Gong Zheng's disappearance, Qi Ziding unjustly took over the position of commander of the entire army. Every day, his angry curses could be heard in the troops. From time to time, someone would be sent flying out of the troops with a strike of his staff, and then roll back obediently. Within 2 days, the troops began to complain. After all, they were used to being undisciplined. Kismet Heaven experts were considered the backbone of the strongholds. The strongest experts in most of the strongholds were only Kismet Heaven experts. Now that they had joined the winged cavalry with all kinds of ideas, they were already complaining incessantly at the first step. However, it was too late to leave now. When Qi Ziding was in charge of the Protectorate of the Northeast, he had seen many storms and waves. How could he not be able to suppress these mountain people? Rinpoche sat behind the Empress and whispered in her ear, "Brother-in-law still likes to lead troops. I see that his gaze is different these 2 days, and his face is full of energy." The first time he met Qi Ziding, he felt that Qi Ziding had a fierce temperament. However, Qi Ziding treated the Empress very well. As a result, Rinpoche didn't see much of his fierce side. However, for the past 2 days, Qi Ziding's eyes and expression were full of oppressive power. Even if he just stood there without saying a word, it was enough to make people fearful. When he spoke, his killing intent soared. Ren Baqian recalled all the officials in the imperial court, and realized that none of them were as powerful as Qi Ziding. Not even Hongwu. The Empress felt that whenever Ren Baqian spoke, he would always exhale on her ears. It was very itchy, and it even tickled her heart. She leaned back and pushed him away before asking, "Brother-in-law?" "Your elder brother. I have to call him brother-in-law over there." The Empress looked back but didn't see Qi Ziding. Instead, she heard his voice coming from behind. "If you continue to walk sideways, I will break your legs." An aggrieved voice sounded. "But I'm riding a giant evil spider." The giant evil spider was 7 to 8 meters long and 2 meters tall. It fed on small animals and birds. It walked horizontally like a crab. A dash. Then a scream was heard. The 5-day journey took them a week to get close to the first destination. After being trained by Qi Ziding along the way, the men behind them seemed to be a little more well-behaved. This bunch of bastards. If it were in the past, would I have let them live until today? They deserve a beating. Qi Ziding's words, coupled with the bruises and injuries of 8 of the 10 men behind him, were particularly convincing. If a small tree isn't trimmed, it won't grow straight. If a person isn't trimmed, he will be valiant. Ren Baqian echoed. Qi Ziding smacked his lips and pondered over Ren Baqian's words for a long time before laughing and saying, "I like what you said. Although you are as soft as an egg, your words are quite to my liking." Ren Baqian's mouth twitched. Was this a compliment? He would take it as a compliment. As they approached the first destination, a cat-like cry came from the front of the group. Not long after, a person came out of the forest ahead. "Greetings, Your Majesty. Is there any change in the situation?" the Empress asked. "Your Majesty, those demonic butterflies are still there, and there aren't many of them." "There shouldn't be any changes," the winged cavalry replied with cupped fists. "Where are they?" "They are about 3 kilometers away from here. They appear at the Z hour every night and leave at the EN hour. Pass down the order to rest in place. I will go and take a look," the Empress ordered. Ren Baqian, Qi Ziding, and the 2 cardinal heaven experts, Ba Man and Xiongyu, followed behind. Not long after passing through the forest, they came across another strangely shaped forest. The trees were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws like monsters. The EN energy in this area was very strong, and this forest was especially so. It was even mixed with a deathly aura. For some reason, Ren Baqian felt that these trees were like the struggles of a person on the verge of death. After thinking about it carefully, the forest where he saw the jade-waisted slaves last time was similar to this. However, his attention was attracted by the jade-waisted slaves, and he didn't pay much attention to the forest. "I'm afraid there's something strange about this forest," Ren Baqian reminded them. The Empress and the rest took a look and looked at him suspiciously. "It's just that these trees look a little strange." "That's the problem. The other trees are fine, but why are the trees here so strange? Look at this tree. Doesn't it look like a human face?" Ren Baqian pointed at a tree trunk. "Yesterday, I thought that your words were to my liking. Why are you so girly today?" Qi Ziding grinned. The Empress glared at him coldly. If he wasn't her brother, she would let him know what it meant to cause trouble with a loose tongue. "The forest where we met Boar was like this, and it's still the same this time. Along the way, although the other forests are half dead, it's still considered normal. I think there are 2 possibilities for this. The first possibility is that this place is different from other places, which is why the herdsman chose this place. The other possibility is that this place became like this because of the herdsman," Ren Baqian said after thinking for a while. "It does look strange, but we didn't encounter anything the last time. I think the first possibility that you mentioned is still possible," the Empress said faintly. "Let's not care about this anymore. We will lie in ambush nearby. When those demonic butterflies appear at night, we will kill them all. When that time comes, I will let the herdsmen torture me and let them know what the aboriginals are like." Qi Ziding grinned and looked murderous. "There's one more thing," Ren Baqian added. "Why are you so girly? If it weren't for Xiaoya, I would have slapped you to death." Qi Ziding raised his eyebrows and looked fierce. The Empress looked at him coldly again, and raised her eyebrows. Although the two of them looked as different as heaven and earth, the expression of the vertical eyebrows was extremely similar. Ren Baqian ignored him and said, "The last time we met Boar, those jade-waisted slaves appeared at night. The jade-waisted slaves here also appeared at night. Also, those people from the stockade also appeared at night." The Empress seemed to understand and asked, "What do you mean?" "I think that they might be affected after daybreak. We can follow them when they fly back. It will be daybreak soon. We might save some energy then." "We will do as you say," the Empress immediately said. If it was nighttime, there would be a lot of casualties in eliminating thousands of jade-waisted slaves. If it was really as Ren Baqian said, it would save a lot of energy. A girl will always be a girl. Before Qi Ziding could finish his sentence, the Empress turned around and kicked him in the chest. Qi Ziding didn't expect the Empress to make a move, and was immediately sent flying dozens of meters away. Ren Baqian chuckled. Chapter 773. At night, a blood moon and a yellow moon hung in the sky in two different directions. The moonlight shone on the forest, forming fragmented spots of light. Ren Baqian sat on a tree trunk and looked into the distance with a pair of binoculars. He saw that the grotesque forest was glowing with a dark green light. Even though most of his vision was blocked, the dark green light that shone on the trees explained everything. "They have appeared," Ren Baqian said. At this moment, the group was still a few kilometers away from the forest where the demons were dancing. They didn't want to be discovered if they got too close. "Your Majesty, are we going to investigate in the sky?" the ladies from Mount Gongmu, who already knew about their mission, asked. Without waiting for the Empress to speak, Ren Baqian sat on a tree trunk and said, "When they leave, follow them in the sky and find their position." "Sir Ren, don't worry." They smiled at Ren Baqian, and one of them even winked at him. That lady was called Gongyu. She was the most delicate and the most courageous. She had winked at Ren Baqian more than once in the past 2 days. Although they were a little disappointed to know that Ren Baqian was the Empress's husband. However, every time they saw the luster on Ren Baqian's body, they were always moved. A man with such a luster on his body was extremely attractive to them. He was like a lighthouse in the dark. If he wasn't the Empress's man, they would really want to snatch him back to their village. "Let your bird go and check the situation." Ren Baqian lowered his head and said to Li Bai. "It's called Third Fatty," Li Bai explained. Ren Baqian felt that it was better to just call it a bird. Li Bai's throat cooed a few times, and the owl cooed reluctantly. However, as Li Bai raised his arms, the owl had no choice but to spread its wings and clumsily flap to maintain its altitude. It cooed a few times before flying forward. Ren Baqian watched it fly for a few minutes before landing on a tree to rest. It flew for another 2 minutes before resting again. It seemed that flying instinctively for birds was a huge burden for it. After more than an hour, the owl flew back shakily and crashed into Li Bai's arms like a brick. "Cuckoo, coo-coo-coo, coo-coo-coo." It said that there are many glowing demon butterflies in the forest. "There is no one else," Li Bai said. Ren Baqian nodded to indicate that he understood. He hung the binoculars around his neck and looked at them every few minutes. Do. Thud. Do. Qi Ziding was bored to death as he poked at the rocks with his wooden staff. After a few pokes, he managed to poke a hole in a rock that was half the size of a human. After a while, the stone was already riddled with holes. Qi Ziding looked up at Ren Baqian and said, "Come down." Ren Baqian lowered his head and looked at him. "I hate it when people are taller than me." Qi Ziding looked dissatisfied. Bam! Ever since the Empress kicked Ren Baqian during the day, she had gotten used to it. In Ren Baqian's eyes, this kick was as smooth as moving clouds and flowing water. It didn't have the slightest trace of smoke and fire, was magnificent, and made people feel relaxed and happy. "Xiaoye, you have changed." Qi Ziding, who had returned to his original seat, had an emotional look on his face. The Empress snorted and couldn't be bothered with him. The image of the majestic man in her heart was crumbling. Everyone waited until it was just past the hour of the day, Renbachian saw through the binoculars that the green light was beginning to fade. They have retreated. It has begun. Renbachian put down the binoculars and said. The women of Mount Gongmu cupped their fists at the Empress, spread out, grabbed the claws of the giant eagle, and flew into the sky. Everyone get ready. Qi Ziding stood up with the help of his crutches, and said to the people behind him. One by one, the winged cavalry warriors and aboriginals checked their weapons. They were either sitting or standing with grave expressions. A murderous aura brewed and churned in the silence. The entire forest was filled with a somber atmosphere. After another hour, the sky began to brighten. A giant bird descended from the sky with a whistling sound. When it was about 7 or 8 meters above the ground, a person fell from the sky. After rolling on the ground, he got up and walked to the Empress and the others. Your Majesty, I have found the location. It's in a mountain about 5 kilometers away from here. Lead the way. Let's go. The Empress got up from the rock with a murderous look on her face. Let's go. More than 1,000 people abandoned their mounts and quickly shuttled through the forest toward the location of their target. As they passed through the forest that was full of demons, Renbachian inadvertently glanced at it and suddenly let out a soft cry of surprise. What happened? The Empress stopped and turned to look at him. The people behind her immediately stopped. The face pattern on this tree seems to have changed a little since I saw it yesterday. Renbachian pointed at a tree and said. This was the tree that Renbachian had pointed out during the day, so it left a deep impression on him. Renbachian felt that there was something different about this tree when he glanced at it. Did you see wrongly? The Empress asked with a frown. She didn't find anything different. Perhaps. Renbachian replied after thinking for a while. However, everyone should be more careful. After the order was passed down, Renbachian walked through the forest with his heart in his mouth. However, nothing happened until he was out of the forest, which made him feel that he might have been overthinking. After walking for more than 2 hours, the sky was already bright. However, for some reason, this land was always much dimmer than the outside world. Your Majesty, it's on that mountain. The lady from Mount Gongmu who was leading the way said as she pointed ahead. After speaking, she put her finger in her mouth and whistled. In the distance, a big bird immediately flew up. When it arrived above everyone's head, a person fell from the bird's body. Your Majesty, there's a cave on the east side of that mountain. The demonic butterflies and something that looks like a human have entered as well. We have been taking turns to monitor them from the sky. They are still inside. This time, it was Gong Yu who landed and reported to the Empress. She occasionally glanced at Renbachian from the corner of her eyes, as if she had inadvertently seen him. However, the way she looked at Renbachian was always different from how she looked at others. There seemed to be a trace of fire in her eyes. Lead the way, the Empress ordered. The mountain wasn't very tall, and the vegetation wasn't dense. This place was the same as other places that they had passed through, filled with a unique kind of coldness. As they got closer, they could see the cave that the people from Mount Gongmu were talking about. Everyone get into position 100 meters away and get ready. Qi Ziding instructed everyone and followed the Empress to the entrance of the cave. From the outside of the cave, it could be seen that there were indeed traces of human activity here. Not far from the entrance of the cave were 2 footprints that were deeply imprinted on the ground. It was as if someone had been standing there all along. Seeing these footprints, everyone could imagine that every night, the demonic butterflies would head to the forest about 5 kilometers away, and a humanoid monster would stand there day after day. Chapter 774. Does the other party know that we are here? Renbachian raised his eyebrows and looked at the Empress. That board discovered us a long time ago. Their senses are very sharp. Before the Empress could reply, a voice came from the cave. You actually know about Boar. Is he dead now? This voice was softer and more pleasing to the ear than Boar's. It was as if listening to the herdsman's voice was a pleasure in itself. It was as if they were enjoying something beautiful in the world. He's dead and he died very miserably. Don't you want to come out and avenge him? Renbachian looked into the cave. Renbachian replied, Avenge? No, revenge is a boring act that is of no use to our survival. Only you humans who are full of complex emotions would do such an emotional thing. Following that voice, a figure appeared in the darkness. He was about 2-3 meters tall, about the same height as Boar. However, he was extremely thin and stood there like a skeleton. No, it's not only humans who like to take revenge. Even the beasts, whether it's the mountain wolves or the Yong, know this. Perhaps only a cold and selfish race like you would regard this as a boring act, Rinpoche retorted. For us, survival is the most important thing. Everything else is boring. You humans compare yourself to the mountain wolves and the Yong. Isn't this proof that you are just inferior creatures? The herdsman continued. You are a bunch of inferior creatures. You are simply courting death. Chiziting scolded fiercely. Isn't the level of a creature measured by its ability to create? Those who don't have creativity and only know how to destroy and kill are the inferior creatures. From this point of view, humans are one of the most superior creatures. On the other hand, you can only kill and destroy. Although you have human-like intelligence, you don't have the creativity of humans and can't bring any change to this world. Who do you think is the inferior race? Rinpoche asked unhurriedly. That makes sense. Chiziting nodded and felt that these words were a little familiar. It seemed that Rinpoche had said something similar to this before. After pondering for a while, he looked at Rinpoche fiercely and said, "Why do I feel like you are scolding me? This is a debate between races. Don't take it personally." Rinpoche smiled helplessly. The herdsman no longer argued with Rinpoche and asked, "You killed Boar and came here to kill me, right?" "I'm here to kill you." The water empress nodded and said coldly, "I still don't know your names. Remember, I am Chi Ergu." Rinpoche quickly interrupted Chiziting. "He's Chi Ergu." After Rinpoche said that, Chiziting glared at him. Rinpoche stared back. "Are you a pig? Didn't I tell you before? Or do you really want to have a taste of what they have up their sleeves? Oh, looks like you guys do know some things. You even know about the connection between names and auras," the herdsman in the darkness said in surprise. "But that's right. If you hadn't discovered this, you wouldn't have been able to kill Boar. Since you want to kill me, then come in." Rinpoche stopped the Empress and Chiziting and asked, "Do you want to come out?" "Come in." "Come out." "I'm not going out." "We're not going in either." The Empress was speechless. Chiziting was speechless. At this point, Rinpoche was sure that the herdsman would be affected by sunlight and wouldn't step out of the cave. "You guys stay here and guard. I want to see what he has up his sleeves," Chiziting said with one crutch on the ground and the other pointing into the cave. "I'm going too," the Empress said coldly. Her voice wasn't loud, but everyone could hear her determination. "I didn't expect to fight alongside Xiaoya. I want to see if this guy can keep us here." Chiziting laughed. "Your Majesty, I'm afraid it's dangerous inside," Rinpoche said. "No one in this world can keep me here," the Empress interrupted him. "I know," Rinpoche sighed. He had waited for so long for reinforcements, but as soon as he saw them, they wanted to step into someone else's territory. The other party is definitely more suitable for this kind of dark environment than you are. Besides, there are also those jade-wasted slaves inside. It's better to be careful, Your Majesty. "I know." The Empress waved her hand. Chiziting tapped his crutches on the ground and shot into the cave like a cannonball. He waved his crutches in the air, and the herdsman in the cave disappeared in a flash. Chiziting hit the cave wall with his crutches, causing the entire cave to shake. "Be careful. This is a cave, and it will collapse if you make a mistake," Rinpoche quickly shouted. However, Chiziting chased after the herdsman and disappeared behind a boulder at the corner. The Empress followed in a flash. Rinpoche sighed and said to the people behind him, "Bring those boxes over." Rinpoche opened one of the boxes, took out a few glass bottles filled with liquid, and put them under his armpit. He held a flashlight in one hand, turned to Ba Man and Xiongyu, and said, "Please bring your things and follow me in." The three of them entered the cave, turned a corner, and saw a very long tunnel ahead. Chiziting's curses and the sound of breaking air echoed in this tunnel. They turned on the flashlight and saw the end of the cave about 30 meters away. There was another corner. After the corner, there was an upward slope. The three of them made 6 or 7 turns along the tunnel and went all the way up. After another 6 or 7 turns, they were getting closer and closer to the source of the sound. Finally, after passing through a tunnel that was more than 100 meters long, they noticed that the scenery in front of them had changed. Countless emerald light spots fluttered in the air, creating an extremely beautiful scene in the darkness. However, behind this beauty was infinite murderous intent. Those jade-waisted slaves weren't just beautiful. In front of them was a huge cave with a radius of 3,000 meters. Countless stalactites hung upside down in the cave, reflecting the emerald light. In this cave, the jade-waisted slaves were most concentrated in 2 places. One of them almost formed a ball, and Chi Ziding's shout came from there. In the other place, there was a green ribbon that was constantly fluttering in the air, changing its shape from time to time as it pounced in a certain direction. With the help of the green light, Ren Baqian saw a faintly discernible red figure in front of the ribbon. It was moving at high speed in the cave as if it was chasing something. Bang! Boom! The path that the Empress took was filled with gravel. Roar! Chi Ziding let out a roar and waved his 2 staffs, creating a gust of wind that constantly sent the jade-waisted slaves flying up and down. Chi Ziding's position was the eye of the storm, and it was as if a hurricane had formed around him. Even Ren Baqian could feel the strong wind blowing at him from where he was. A large number of jade-waisted slaves were swept away by the strong wind created by Chi Ziding's 2 staffs and fell to the ground in large numbers. They slowly began to shrink and wither before turning into grayish-white ashes that were swept away by the strong wind in the cave. Ren Baqian understood at a glance that Chi Ziding's move was indeed powerful. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of jade-waisted slaves had fallen. However, there were many more jade-waisted slaves in this cave than there were in Boar's cave. There were at least 20,000 of them. Chapter 775. As the bottle broke, the liquid inside splashed everywhere. After the first bottle was thrown, Ren Baqian opened the boxes that Ba Man and Xiongyu brought, and threw out a total of 8 bottles filled with pesticide number 1. As the pesticide was scattered everywhere, it gradually turned into gas due to the airflow in the cave. Ren Baqian nervously stared at the jade-waisted slaves flying in the air around Chi Ziding, wanting to see if pesticide number 1 had any effect. After staring for a long time, he didn't see any changes. The jade-waisted slaves were still flying up and down in the air, and some of them were even drawn into the shadows of Chi Ziding's staff. Sir Ren, let's go and help. Ba Man and Xiongyu couldn't wait any longer. One of them rushed toward Chi Ziding while the other rushed toward the Empress. However, even though they were Cardinal Heaven experts, they were far weaker than Chi Ziding and the Empress, so they could only circle around the periphery. Ba Man, who rushed toward Chi Ziding, was in a better situation as he attracted the attention of some of the jade-waisted slaves. The other person could barely keep up with the Empress and walk side by side with the jade-waisted slaves. It looked like they were in a race. Ren Baqian took out the second box of pesticide number 2 and threw it near Chi Ziding again. At this time he smelled some bitter almonds. It was the smell of cyanide. This kind of poison was very harmful to ordinary people, but seeing that his brother-in-law was full of vigor, Ren Baqian felt that he should be fine. Even an ordinary earthwill expert could withstand the poison much longer than an ordinary person, let alone a Cardinal Heaven expert. After throwing the second batch of bottles, Ren Baqian felt that the movements of some of the demonic butterflies were a little slower and couldn't maintain their balance in the air. Their originally graceful flying posture changed slightly, as if they were drunk driving. This made Ren Baqian happy that pesticide number 2 had some effect. At this moment, a gust of wind brushed past Ren Baqian's body. Ren Baqian felt a slight prickling pain in his eyes and quickly closed them. When he lowered his head, he felt 2 sharp objects poking at his forehead. "You're courting death." The Empress, who was following closely behind, stretched out her hand and punched the air. The herdsman was like a willow catkin drifting in the wind, and was blown away by the Empress's punch. "Be careful," the Empress said before hurriedly chasing after the herdsman. Renbachian felt some liquid flowing down from his forehead. When he wiped it with his hand, his palm was filled with bright red blood. Damn it! Renbachian cursed. Recently he had been cultivating this yang-boosting true technique, and the biggest weakness was his head. This cultivation technique was originally meant for him to consummate his marriage. If he wanted to train his head to the same level as his body, he would first have to withdraw his head into the water, and then experience the baptism of ***********. Renbachian didn't think that his brain was that strong. Therefore, he had completely given up on training his head. At this time, he had suffered such a loss. Fortunately, the herdsman's body was not strong. If the opponent's body was stronger, his head would have exploded. Seeing that the Empress was chasing after the herdsman, he took out the third-generation insecticide bottles and threw them at her. The liquid in the bottle had a faint stench. It was the stench of a stink bug, which was commonly referred to as a smelly big sister. However, when combined with the smell of the first and second-generation insecticides, it immediately formed a stench that made one's stomach churn. Before the jade-wasted slaves could react, Cheeziting couldn't help but scream, "Kid, what are you doing?" The stench almost surrounded him as if he had fallen into a cesspool, causing him to almost fall to the ground. The second to react was Xiongyu. Under the siege of hundreds of jade-wasted slaves, he was still barely holding on, but when the stench entered his nose, he couldn't hold on any longer, and a few bloody wounds appeared on his body. These jade-wasted slaves looked extremely beautiful, but when they circled around a person, a circle of bloody wounds would appear on the person's body. Their wings were like weapons. What was even more ferocious was their human-like head. They would pounce on a person and bite them, refusing to let go no matter what. Their ferocious faces were the complete opposite of that beautiful fluorescent light. The two of them cursed at first, but the effects of the insecticide were quickly apparent. The jade-wasted slaves swayed in the air as if they were drunk. After a short while, hundreds of them fell from the sky and fell to the ground, twitching. "It's done!" Renbachian was overjoyed. He took out all the third-generation insecticide from the box behind him, and threw it wherever he saw the most jade-wasted slaves. Soon the cave was filled with the stench of insecticide, and the number of jade-wasted slaves flying in the sky decreased by half. Most of the jade-wasted slaves fell to the ground and kept twitching. They struggled to fly up, but no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't. "Kid, what the hell did you throw?" Cheeziting, who was still in the cave, was shocked to see this. He had spent so much effort, but he didn't kill as many jade-wasted slaves as Renbachian did. It wasn't even a fraction. After spending so much effort, he had only killed around 1,000 of them. However, nearly half of the 20,000 jade-wasted slaves in the cave had fallen to the ground, almost forming a layer of them. The rest were swaying in the air, and were greatly affected. Even those who were chasing after the Empress had slowed down. Seeing that the situation had improved, Renbachian immediately shouted, "Don't worry about the jade-wasted slaves for now. Go and catch the culprit, that herdsman." With this, the situation immediately changed. Previously, the Empress was chasing the herdsman, the jade-wasted slaves were chasing the Empress, and the barbarians were racing with them. On the other side, Cheeziting and Xiongyu were tightly surrounded by the jade-wasted slaves. Now there were less than half of the jade-wasted slaves in the cave. The remaining ones were swaying, slowed down, and kept falling from the sky. Cheeziting and Xiongyu immediately came out and surrounded the herdsman with 4 people. No matter how big this cave was, it was still an enclosed space. Under the encirclement of the 4 people, the herdsman was immediately surrounded by danger, and had no choice but to rush toward Renbachian. It seemed like he was trying to escape. "Stop him! Hide!" Cheeziting and the Empress shouted at almost the same time. However, the content was completely opposite. The herdsman looked similar to Boar, and stared at Renbachian with a pair of green eyes. Behind Renbachian was the exit of the cave. Even if the sunlight was harmful to him, his chances of escaping would increase greatly as long as he could get out of here. As for the person in front of him, he was the weakest among them, so he didn't take him seriously at all. He could even kill him. Just now, It was the crystal pillar-like objects that he threw out that greatly affected the jade-waisted slaves. If he didn't kill him, he would definitely be a disaster. Your Majesty, protect yourself. Renbachian shouted and grinned. These pesticides weren't as simple as pesticides. After they evaporated, they were flammable. This was something that the Messier 87 department had repeatedly warned them about. Renbachian took out a lighter and looked at the herdsman who was rushing over with a mocking look on his face. Watch my big fireball. Boom. It was as if the cave had exploded. The huge flame instantly filled more than half of the cave. The herdsman, who was sandwiched between Renbachian and the Empress, happened to be in the middle of the flame, and was instantly engulfed. An hour later, the Empress dragged Renbachian, who looked like a dead dog, out of the cave with a few holes in her red muslin dress and a blackened face. Qi Ziding, Ba Man and Xiongyu looked like black brothers. Chapter 776. Big Fireball Technique? The Empress glanced at Renbachian, whose limbs were tied up beside Qi Shui, and hit him on the head with the stick. At this time, Renbachian's limbs were tied up, and his head was covered in black and white patches. His clothes were tattered, and he looked as miserable as one could imagine. However, the surface of his body under his clothes wasn't injured, and his skin was still glowing. Your Majesty, I was wrong, Renbachian said obediently. Ha. Wrong? Humph, big fireball technique? Isn't it fun? The Empress looked at the holes in her red muslin, and her face darkened as she hit him with the stick again. I was wrong. How would I know that it would be so powerful? Renbachian felt wronged. Although they said that it was flammable gas, who would have thought that it would be so powerful? It wasn't like it was gasoline. Didn't I ask you to dodge? The Empress hit him again. I think I have a big fireball technique. Renbachian felt that he had done a good job. Weren't the herdsmen already familiar with it? I'll let you use the big fireball technique. I'll let you use the big fireball technique. The Empress raised her eyebrows and hit Renbachian's head with the stick. She didn't use much strength, but it was enough to make his head swell. His shiny head was covered with evenly distributed lumps of flesh, making him look like Sakyamuni. Renbachian let out a soul-stirring moan. The Empress's face darkened even more. If Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan covered their mouths and couldn't stop laughing. The black general followed behind Qi Shui with a gloating look on his face. It turned out that humming occasionally was useful. At least, the Empress didn't hit him with the stick again. Xiaoya. Qi Ziding caught up from the back of a huge lizard. Although I also want to beat him to death, those things of his are still quite useful, Qi Ziding said fairly. The Empress snorted. How could she not know that those things were useful? She was just angry. She had already asked him to dodge, but he insisted on playing with the big fireball technique, and was blown up like a dead dog. What did you use? Qi Ziding looked down at Renbachian, who was hanging upside down on the side of Qi Shui, and asked. He had been pondering this question for a long time. It's a type of poison specially used to deal with bugs. Renbachian flashed a bright smile at Qi Ziding. I didn't expect you to know how to use poison. Qi Ziding was surprised. The Aboriginals usually used poison by smearing the venom of snakes and insects onto their arrows. However, it was rarely used. This was because only some snakes and insects' venom could kill their prey, and humans would not be poisoned after eating their prey. Furthermore, the Aboriginals weren't weak. Prey that were easily poisoned weren't very strong, so the Aboriginals didn't need to resort to such methods. He used venom on some beasts that were difficult to deal with, but those beasts were extremely resistant to venom. As a result, the Aboriginals rarely used poison and didn't do much research on poisons. He didn't expect Renbachian to be good at using poison. This surprised him a little. I'm even afraid of myself when I use poison. Renbachian grinned, revealing a set of white teeth. It looked especially white on his blackened face. I have underestimated you. Qi Ziding thought about the situation at that time, and felt that this guy was indeed good at using poison. If he asked Renbachian what he was afraid of, Renbachian would most likely tell him that he was afraid of poisoning himself to death. I'll let you use the great fireball technique. The Empress seemed to have thought of something and angrily swung the rod at Renbaqian's head again. Renbaqian groaned through his nose. Qi Ziding looked at Renbaqian with a strange expression, and then at the Empress. He sighed and said, "Xiaoye, you have changed. Forget it, you have grown up. I won't say any more." The Empress didn't react at first, but when she saw Qi Ziding sigh, she suddenly realized something, and her face turned red. She gritted her teeth and looked at Qi Ziding and Renbaqian. She really wanted to bury these two guys under the palace. Renbaqian was hung by Qi Shui's side for an entire day, before he was put down by the Empress. He tidied up the dust on his face and whispered into her ear, "Your Majesty, I just discovered something very important." "What is it?" The Empress was a little annoyed at first, but she immediately suppressed her other thoughts when she saw how serious he was. Renbaqian looked at Qi Shui with a strange expression and said, "Your Majesty, I was hung by Qi Shui's side just now, and my head was about the same height as its abdomen. I discovered that Qi Shui is a female." Bam! Renbaqian was kicked into a tree by the angry Empress. As soon as he jumped down, he was knocked to the ground by Qi Shui, whose scales had exploded and trampled on. Steam was coming out of Qi Shui's nostrils. Renbaqian held his head and stole a glance at Qi Shui's lower body. He was sure that it was indeed a female. After another 2 days, the Crow General carried a few more big bags on its back, containing bottles of third-generation insecticide. Everyone finally arrived at their second destination, where Gong Zheng and Lin Xiaola had disappeared. According to the previous arrangement, everyone was prepared to follow the jade-waisted slaves after they left before daybreak. Renbaqian hated the herdsman here even more. After all, this was where Lin Xiaola died. Every time he thought of that girl with a pair of as, he felt that it was a pity. After her disappearance, he felt that it wasn't bad to have such a person by his side sometimes. All she did was eat and sleep, and she would feed him a few sweets whenever she felt like it. Usually, she wouldn't show off her existence in front of him. It was probably similar to raising a cat. Most importantly, even though she had a pair of as, she was still a delicate and pretty female beast. She was a living person. She even accompanied him to the north and south. This made Renbaqian feel upset every time he thought about it. The closer he got to this place, the deeper this feeling became. However, when he picked up his binoculars and looked into the forest in the distance, his gaze froze. He saw a little girl with a pair of as with disheveled hair catching butterflies in the forest. Wherever those jade-waisted slaves landed, she would crouch down and stare at them. Then she would pounce on them, occasionally catching one and stuffing it into her mouth with a satisfied look on her face. This girl, who was Lin Xiaola. This made Renbaqian tremble on the spot. He was agitated and angry from time to time. "You came here to protect Gong Zheng. Now that he has disappeared, you are catching butterflies here?" In an instant, Renbaqian had the thought of burying this guy. After his anger subsided, he frowned again. If Lin Xiaola was seen by the Empress, what would she do? Would she let her off? Given the Empress's temperament, there was a 90% chance that she would bury Gong Zheng and Lin Xiaola after such a thing had happened. There was no news of Gong Zheng and Lin Xiaola was here chasing butterflies. There was also a 10% chance that she would kill Lin Xiaola before burying her. Regardless of Lin Xiaola's identity or the relationship between her and the Empress couldn't let this matter go so easily. Otherwise, not only would she let down Gong Zheng, but she would also let down those winged cavalry warriors who had disappeared in this area. Even Renbaqian felt that he shouldn't let Lin Xiaola off. Whether it was national law, family rules, or human relationships, there was no reason to forgive her. This made Renbaqian have mixed feelings. He was resentful that Lin Xiaola didn't meet his expectations, but he also couldn't bear it. Chapter 777. Renbaqian's expression changed. He knew that he couldn't hide this matter, so he said softly, "Lin Xiaola is in the forest." "Lin Xiaola is in the forest. What about Gong Zheng?" The Empress was a little surprised and happy. "I didn't see her." Renbaqian shook his head. "What's the situation with Lin Xiaola?" the Empress asked again. "What's the situation with Lin Xiaola?" the Empress asked again. I'm not sure, Renbaqian said hesitantly. The Empress instantly appeared beside him, took the binoculars from his hand, looked ahead and asked, where is she? However, she saw it without Renbaqian's help. Renbaqian felt a gust of wind blow past him. From the corner of his eye, he saw a red figure flash and disappear. Brother-in-law, Her Majesty has rushed over. Renbaqian shouted at the bottom of the tree and followed her. The forest was like a group of demons dancing in a frenzy. Groups of jade-waisted slaves filled the forest, lying on the ground or on the tree trunks, causing the forest to be filled with a dark green glow. Occasionally, a jade-waisted slave would fly up, and it was a breathtakingly beautiful sight. If one were to say that it was a beautiful scenery, then this forest was a little strange. A pretty girl in a dirty tube top and shorts was in the forest. From time to time, she would pounce on a group of jade-waisted slaves, scaring them into the air. The girl would grab one and stuff it into her mouth as if she was tasting something delicious. She closed her eyes and reveled in it for a moment. Not long after, the girl curled up on the ground, either because she was full or because she was tired. She hugged her knees and curled up as much as possible, just like a baby in a mother's womb. At this time, a red figure landed in front of the forest and stared at the girl. Lin Xiaola. The Empress's voice was cold and full of murderous intent. In fact, the Empress and Lin Xiaola had a good relationship. Lin Xiaola had been in the palace longer than the Empress, and she always had the image of a young girl. When the Empress was young, she felt that Lin Xiaola was like an elder sister. As she gradually grew up, Lin Xiaola became a younger sister. Although they didn't have a deep relationship, it wasn't shallow. Therefore, when Lin Xiaola got the white rabbit creamy candy from Renbaqian, she immediately ran to the Empress to present it. It was precisely because of their friendship that Lin Xiaola appeared here after Gongzheng disappeared. One could imagine how furious the Empress was. The Empress's appearance instantly startled the jade-waisted slaves in the forest. They flew up and circled in the air like ribbons of lights. Lin Xiaola's curled-up body was now lying on the ground. Her limbs were maintained at a certain angle, as if she was ready to pounce at any time. A small face stared at the Empress expressionlessly. You want to fight with me? Looking at this situation, the Water Empress laughed. However, even Renbaqian, who was chasing after him, could feel the killing intent as if he was being pricked by needles. Your Majesty. Renbaqian landed behind the Empress and said, Your Majesty, don't be anxious. Lin Xiaola is a little strange. Since when did Lin Xiaola dare to act like an animal in front of His Majesty? This in itself isn't normal, Renbaqian said anxiously. The Empress gradually calmed down after hearing what Renbaqian said. You're right. Renbaqian carefully stared at Lin Xiaola and said, Your Majesty, look at her eyes. They have vertical pupils. The Empress looked at Lin Xiaola seriously. Indeed, as Renbaqian said, Lin Xiaola's pupils were vertical and oval. There was even a little green color hidden in her pupils. Your Majesty, do you still remember that boar asked us for our names back then? After that, the second herdsman also asked us about our names. I was curious about what would happen if they knew our names. Now that I see Lin Xiaola's condition, I have some conjectures. If those herdsmen can control a person through their name, then it makes sense. That explained why the ancient race beings would come here without a sound, and die in silence one by one. It also makes sense why Lin Xiaola became like this, Renbaqian said thoughtfully. The Empress remained silent after hearing this. Renbaqian's conjecture seemed to be very likely. She suddenly felt a sense of anticipation, and hoped that things were really as Renbaqian said. If possible, she didn't want to kill this girl, who hadn't changed much in more than 20 years. Chi-Zitting, Ba-Man, and the others landed beside the Empress, and looked at the dancing jade-waisted slaves in the forest. Most importantly, they looked at the girl lying on the ground. What's this? Chi-Zitting asked with a frown. Lin Xiaola. Renbaqian suddenly shouted. Lin Xiaola, who was lying on the ground, suddenly shivered. Her pupils narrowed as if she was startled by Renbaqian's sudden shout. At this moment, a burst of desolate music rang out. The jade-waisted slaves flew in the direction of the sound. Lin Xiaola lay on the ground and retreated more than 10 steps. Seeing that no one had any intention of attacking, she turned around and quickly fled into the forest. Go. The Empress only said one word before slowly walking into the depths of the forest. At this point, hiding wasn't important anymore. The important thing was to take down Lin Xiaola and this herdsman. Not long after they entered the forest, Ren Baqian suddenly stopped and said with an indescribable emotion, "Your Majesty, I see Gongzheng." The Empress turned her head abruptly and saw that he was staring at a tree. On the bark of that tree, there was a human face. The appearance of that face sent a chill down the Empress's spine. It was Gongzheng. The face on the tree was distorted, full of pain, and its mouth was wide open. Although it appeared on the surface of the tree's bark and was somewhat different from a human body, one could still tell that it looked very similar to Gongzheng. "Captain of the Winged Cavalry?" Qi Ziding asked. He looked at the face on the tree and swung his walking stick at it. "Living like this is worse than death." Bang! The Empress swung her walking stick away. "Why stop me?" Qi Ziding looked at the Empress. "This tree is him, right? It's better to die than to live like this. Capture Lin Xiaola and the herdsman first, then come back and deal with this place. Maybe we can find out something after we capture the herdsman," Ren Baqian said. He finally knew why he felt that the forest was strange before. It turned out that this forest that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws was transformed from a single person. This truth was simply terrifying. At this moment, he still held on to a glimmer of hope that the herdsman could actually transform people like this. Perhaps there was a way to save them. However, he also knew that this hope was extremely slim. "Get someone to keep an eye on this place. Let's go." After saying this, the Empress turned away from the tree and walked into the depths of the forest with a solemn expression. Her red dress fluttered despite the absence of wind. Her hair also fluttered behind her. With the Empress as the center, the coldness spread in all directions, causing everyone to feel cold all over. Chapter 778. Before the group left the forest, they saw a large green light surging towards them. "Gather in place and get ready to kill," Qi Ziding shouted. "Kill." More than 1,000 winged cavalry warriors shouted at the same time. The leaves in the forest shot up into the sky, forming a green pillar that connected to the sky. It was as if everyone's murderous aura had condensed into a substance. The trees and strange rocks in front of the winged cavalry were flattened and charged toward the incoming jade-waisted slaves. The jade-waisted slaves danced in the air and drew an arc in the crowd from time to time. The winged cavalry warriors and jade-waisted slaves were armed with mace, giant axe, long saber, and long stick that was as thick as an arm. Some of them even used the thigh bones of unknown beasts as weapons. These weapons were like bears dancing with butterflies against these little guys. The scene wasn't very pleasant. The winged cavalry warriors, who had great strength and rough moves, hated these small and agile opponents the most. Moreover, the jade-waisted slaves had the advantage in numbers, and there were at least 10,000 of them. Fortunately, the average strength of the jade-waisted slaves was only at the man-will level or even lower. Although they were agile, they were much slower than the winged cavalry warriors. The scene was ugly, and hundreds of jade-waisted slaves fell every minute. However, there were more than 10,000 jade-waisted slaves in the training hall, and there were 1,600 winged cavalry warriors. This kind of speed was rather slow. Those jade-waisted slaves have a formation. Ren Baqian discovered this problem with a glance. Although the jade-waisted slaves were falling in large numbers, they were on the whole in an orderly manner. There was also a flute-like music coming from afar, which must be how the jade-waisted slaves were commanded. Not bad. The Empress nodded. After Boar's death, the jade-waisted slaves didn't know what to do and circled in front of the mountain. This was how they were eliminated by the winged cavalry with minimal effort. The guards behind Ren Baqian opened a box and threw a bunch of glass bottles at the crowd. As the insecticide quickly spread in the air, the scene immediately changed, and the jade-waisted slaves in the air began to slow down. At this time, being slow meant death. The jade-waisted slaves that were flying in the air suddenly fell like rain. The winged cavalry warriors at the scene immediately let out a carefree laughter. Even though these little things weren't considered strong, they were very troublesome to deal with. Once these transparent crystals were thrown over, these things would fall one after another. Even a mace would be able to hit one or two of them. At this moment, a black shadow suddenly darted into the arena and headed straight for the boxes behind Renbachian. Bang! With a wave of the Empress's palm, that figure was immediately sent flying. His head was upside down, and his limbs were grabbing onto the tree trunk. He flashed his canine teeth at the Empress with a fierce look on his face. Although Lin Xiaola's face looked fierce no matter how one looked at it, at this time, when paired with the 2-inch-long nails and a pair of vertical pupils, it looked a little creepy. Hee 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 hee. A silvery bell-like laughter came from the darkness. There are so many guests today. They were all top-notch nourishment. Should I thank you for coming to my door? Trying to mystify us. The Empress kicked a rock and ran into the darkness. Come out. 10 breaths later, the herdsman in the darkness looked behind him with a puzzled expression. Who was he hitting? No one was there. However, he quickly suppressed his doubts and looked at the Empress and the rest in the forest. He let out a crisp laugh and said, "This half-human with an ancient bloodline is yours, right? I didn't expect to meet her here. How lucky. Unfortunately, you came too early. If you had come a little later, I could have trained her and shown you the true power of the ancient bloodline." Are you referring to the chinchilla bloodline? Renbachian raised his voice and asked. He had heard this from Qi Ziding. You actually know about it? The herdsman was puzzled at first, but then understood. She has been like this because you don't know how to stimulate the chinchilla bloodline. It's a pity that you have such a powerful weapon but don't know how to use it. But that's right. You abandoned people have long forgotten about those things. It's already beyond my expectations to know that she has the chinchilla bloodline. Abandoned people? What do you mean? The Empress asked coldly. Hee, since you have forgotten about it, I won't tell you. The herdsman in the darkness said. You will die if you don't finish your sentence. Renbachian sighed. Die? You can talk after you defeat the half-human with the chinchilla bloodline. The herdsman laughed in the darkness. Then the sound of a flute could be heard. Lin Xiaola's face revealed a painful expression. Her teeth began to grow longer, and her body seemed to have grown a size larger. Her clothes were tightly wrapped around her body. A pair of A's had become a pair of C's. This shocked Renbachian. At this time, Lin Xiaola wasn't just a size larger. Her figure had also become more voluptuous, and her exquisite curves had become more attractive. Her face was even more seductive. After taking a closer look, Renbachian saw something that shocked him even more. Tail. Renbachian suddenly realized that there was a tail sticking out of Lin Xiaola's skirt. It was a very short, gray and fluffy tail. Brother-in-law, stop him. Even though Lin Xiaola looked pretty good, Renbachian still didn't dare to let her continue and hurriedly shouted. Inf. Qi Ziding snorted. He tapped his crutches on the ground and swooped into the darkness like a huge eagle. At this moment, a figure pounced out of the darkness and collided with Qi Ziding in the air. Boom. The jade-waisted slaves around them were sent flying. Even the soil and stones on the ground were shaved off. Both of them were sent flying backward. Renbachian had sharp eyes and saw that there was a snake's tail behind that figure. Ha 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 ha. So powerful. Qi Ziding landed in the forest, laughed a few times, and swooped into the darkness again. At this time, Lin Xiaola also pounced toward them. Her speed was much faster than before, and Renbachian couldn't see her at all. The Empress's face was instantly covered with purplish-red veins as she charged toward Lin Xiaola. The two of them exchanged a few body positions in the air before stopping. There was almost no sound of collision. Renbachian looked over and saw a few patches of white and purple on the Empress's waist and abdomen. There was also a faint red seeping out. However, with a wipe of her hand, the wound disappeared, leaving only snow-white skin and purple veins. However, the red muslin on her body and the hole in her undergarments couldn't be wiped off. Renbachian took a deep breath. According to the description of the heavenly silkworm dragging beans, this was simply terrifying. The Empress was actually injured by Lin Xiala in one move. Lin Xiala was lying on the ground with 3 limbs on the ground. One of her hands was raised, and she kept flicking her nails, making a sizzling sound. Chapter 779. The Empress's face was ice cold, but her eyes were wide open. It was evident that she found it unbelievable that she had been injured by Lin Xiala. In the next second, the two of them were entangled in the air at a speed that could not be seen clearly. There was almost no sound of collision between the two, but trees fell out of thin air. Marks kept appearing on the ground. Hee, how is it? Did I teach him well? The herdsman's voice came from the darkness again. What's that thing with a snake tail? Renbaqian asked as he looked around. That's Lu Sheng. He has the bloodline of Snake Xiao. What do you think? It was a pity that she did not have much bloodline and her upper limit was too low. However, it's more than enough to deal with you. I would like to thank you for sending me this half-human with the blood of a chinchilla. The herdsman's laughter was ear-piercing. However, the current situation was indeed a little troublesome. Qi Ziding was entangled by Lu Sheng, and the Empress was entangled by Lin Xiala. Furthermore, Lin Xiala's strength had increased tremendously. The two of you, go and give that herdsman some trouble, Renbaqian said to Ba Man and Xiongyu, who were watching the scene anxiously. This place? The two hesitated. You guys won't be able to help either. Capture the ringleader first, Renbaqian said as he looked at the scene. Although Renbaqian let the two of them go, he didn't have high expectations. The two of them were much slower than the herder, not to mention the fact that the herder was obviously stronger than the previous two. Renbaqian frowned as he pondered if there was any solution. At the same time, he rummaged through his bag to see if there was anything that could be used at this moment. He wondered if the large fireball spell would work. It probably wouldn't cause too much damage. Renbaqian opened a bag and realized that it was filled with sweets. He rolled his eyes and had an idea. No matter what, he had to give it a try first. Look at my dove. Renbaqian took 2 pieces of dove, opened the packaging, and threw them into the arena. Look at my gilly. Look at my Ferrero. Watch my Su Fuji. Look at my golden monkey. Look at my white rabbit creations. Lin Xiala instantly appeared in the air and caught the white rabbit creamy candy in her mouth. The Empress followed closely behind and struck her with her palm. Lin Xiala dodged in midair. In the empty space where she was originally standing, the Empress created a hole with a radius of 3 meters. Seeing that it was effective, Renbaqian was overjoyed. Sure enough, he had to use the white rabbit creamy candy to deal with Lin Xiala. Look at my white rabbit creations. Lin Xiala, damn. Big white rabbit. Damn. Big white rabbit. Damn. Bang. The Empress slapped Lin Xiala, who was flying in the air, into the ground. The Empress, whose body was covered with purplish-red veins, landed and punched Lin Xiala repeatedly. Renbaqian could feel the ground shaking as if there was an earthquake. After a few punches, a large pit with a radius of more than 100 feet appeared on the ground. Renbaqian lay at the edge of the pit and saw the Empress stand up from Lin Xiala's body. The wrinkles on her face gradually faded away. He's not dead, right? Renbaqian asked worriedly. He has fainted, the Empress said before disappearing into the pit. Impossible. How is this possible? Why are you here? How can you defeat a half-human with the blood of a chinchilla? A panic scream came from afar. Renbaqian felt that it was much better than the bell-like laughter from before. You won't understand the world of a foodie. Renbaqian looked relaxed. Renbaqian jumped into the pit and looked at Lin Xiala. Her face looked like a half-human after being beaten by the Empress, but her chest was heaving up and down. She had indeed fainted. There were also a few pieces of white rabbit creations stained with saliva in the soil beside her mouth. Renbaqian wiped the soil off the white rabbit creations and stuffed them into her mouth. He stood up and looked at Lin Xiala. She was about 1.55 meters tall before, but now, she looked about the same height as the Empress. Her originally skinny figure was much more voluptuous, and her pair of C's were very conspicuous on her body. That delicate and pretty face. He couldn't look at it because she had already become a half-human. He then went to look for ropes to tie her up. After losing a pair of A's and picking up a pair of C's, Renbachian felt that he had made a profit this time. He was in a good mood. He took off the leather clothes of a few winged cavalry warriors, cut them into strips with a knife, twisted them into ropes, and then hummed a tune while tying them up. Don't think that I didn't notice you sneaking out to meet her again. Don't ask me for my opinion. There's obviously something wrong with your eyes. This is my last warning. If you still don't know how to behave, get out of my sight with that vixen. Sir, what's a vixen? A few winged cavalry guards standing at the side asked. The fight was in full swing. A few winged cavalry warriors threw insecticide wherever they saw a lot of jade-waisted slaves, and completely controlled the situation. That herdsman who abducted Lin Xiaola is a vixen, Renbachian said casually and conveniently changed the direction of Lin Xiaola's body. Don't expose yourself. This fellow actually wasn't wearing any underwear. After thinking about it, it didn't seem very good for her to be tied up without underwear. Renbachian tore a piece of cloth from his body and put it on her. He also conveniently studied how her tail grew and casually stroked it. They're called herdsmen, right? I understand. Tadeo, you're also a vixen, right? Vixen is actually a relative term. One of the winged cavalry warriors suddenly said. Renbachian was stunned and blankly looked back at the winged cavalry warrior, who looked quite young. I didn't expect you to comprehend the theory of relativity. Renbachian was shocked. This was Dayo's Einstein. The theory of relativity was Einstein, right? Report to my school when we get back, Renbachian said. It's a waste for such a talent to be in the winged cavalry. Sir, I still think it's pretty good to be in the winged cavalry. The man smiled embarrassedly. Cut the crap. What's your name? Renbachian interrupted him. Sufu. Renbachian looked at the winged cavalry warrior again and said, I'll inform Her Majesty later. Report to the school when you get back. You can't refuse. Sir, I can't read. The man's face immediately turned bitter. You can learn if you can't read. It's a gift to be able to comprehend the theory of relativity. Renbachian lowered his head and continued to tie her up. After a while, he finally finished tying her up. The surrounding winged cavalry warriors couldn't bear to watch. They shifted their gaze to the side, and then secretly shifted their gaze back. It couldn't be helped because Lin Xiaola's current image was too attractive. Her figure could be said to be curvaceous, and now that she was tied up by Renbachian's tortoiseshell, her alluring parts were all highlighted. It made people's mouths dry up. An hour later, the battle was coming to an end, and the Empress walked back with a cold face. Renbachian didn't need to ask to know that the herdsman had escaped just by looking at her face. However, the jade-waisted slaves were left here to obstruct everyone, and Lu Sheng was also pestering Qi Ziding. Even if the herdsman escaped, he wouldn't be able to cause any trouble for the time being. Did you tie her up? The Empress's face immediately turned black when she saw Lin Xiaola being tied up by Renbachian. Lin Xiaola is a little difficult to deal with now, so I used all the methods I could to restrict her movements. Who knew that she would end up like this? Renbachian looked at Lin Xiaola doubtfully, and then at his own hands as if he couldn't believe that he was the one who tied her up. Chapter 780. Lu Sheng still managed to escape in the end. Renbachian wanted to capture Lu Sheng since the herdsman wouldn't be able to cause much trouble. However, it wasn't easy to capture a herdsman with such strength. This was especially so in the middle of the night, and in a completely unfamiliar forest. Qi Ziding chased for almost an hour, and couldn't even see Lu Sheng's shadow before returning resentfully. At this point, all the jade-waisted slaves had been killed. Count the casualties and report to me, the Empress ordered. Now that Gongzheng wasn't around, it wasn't as easy to command the winged cavalry as before, which made her feel inconvenient. In the end, more than 10 people died. There were more than 100 lightly injured. Fortunately, as long as they didn't lose an arm or a leg, these people wouldn't take it seriously. Furthermore, they were only able to achieve this result with the help of insecticide. It was evident that the jade-waisted slaves with a commander were indeed a threat. Even if they weren't strong individually, Tens of thousands of them could still pose a great threat. Not long after, Lin Xiaola, who had been beaten into a half-beast by the Empress, woke up. She was tied up tightly by Renbaqian and couldn't exert any strength. Her nails were 3 inches long, but they couldn't touch any ropes. It had to be said that Renbaqian put a lot of effort into this tortoiseshell binding. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't break free. Instead, some parts of her body became even tighter. Lin Xiaola. Renbaqian looked down at Lin Xiaola, who was constantly struggling on the ground. Her eyes were still vertical, and there was a hidden green glow in them. Her face was full of ferocity. White rabbit creamy candy. Renbaqian took out a piece of white rabbit creamy candy and threw it into her mouth. Lin Xiaola swallowed the white rabbit creamy candy and calmed down for a few minutes before struggling violently again. Renbaqian threw another piece of milk candy into her mouth, grabbed a handful, and stuffed it into the hands of the guard beside him. He told the guard to give Lin Xiaola a piece every few minutes before going to look for the Empress. Lin Xiaola hasn't recovered and seems to still be controlled by that herdsman. We have to catch him and find a solution. Renbaqian found the Empress leaning against a tree, sat down beside her, and held her hand. However, it wouldn't be easy to catch that herdsman. Especially now that all his jade-waisted slaves were dead, it would be even harder to find him. The Empress muttered to herself. How did you manage to keep those 2 heaven-grade weapons? Does your majesty mean to bring it back to Earth? Renbaqian immediately reacted. The herdsman's control over Lin Xiaola can't compare to Tung Yu's control over his heaven-grade weapon, the Empress said. Just now, Renbaqian really didn't think of this point, but the Empress pointed it out in an instant. This was probably what it meant when one was closely involved in the situation. I'll give it a try tomorrow, Renbaqian said. This method indeed had a high probability of success. As long as she got rid of the herder's control, Lin Xiaola would return to her original state. Then everyone came to the tree with the face of justice. Looking at the tree, no one knew what to do. Is he inside the tree? Renbaqian asked doubtfully. Otherwise, why would the tree have the same face as him? However, the tree was only slightly thicker than a person's head. It couldn't fit a person at all. Remove the tree layer by layer. I want to see what's inside, the Empress said coldly. Immediately, someone peeled the tree layer by layer from the bark to the inside, but there was no trace of justice. Underground, Renbaqian reminded. Since he wasn't inside the tree, he must be underground. Dig it all up, the Empress ordered. A moment later, everyone looked at the dug-up ground and felt a chill in their hearts. Sure enough, they saw justice. He was tightly entangled by the tree roots, and his skin was wrapped around his bones. He was no different from a dead person. The originally tall and strong man was now almost unrecognizable. If it weren't for the tattoo on his body and the missing finger, no one would be able to recognize him. Everyone could see that the tree roots weren't only entangling justice, but also piercing into his body, robbing him of everything he had, including his strength, blood, and even his soul. Everyone finally knew why there was a face on the tree trunk. This tree had actually absorbed everything about him. The Empress clenched her fists, and her face turned pale. She had never hated a person or a race so much in her life. Besides Justice's corpse, there were at least 7 or 8 skeletons tightly entangled by the tree roots. Most of them were aboriginals, and only 2 or 3 were from beasts. This was just one tree. It was unknown how many aboriginals' souls were buried in this forest. This wasn't the only forest like this. At least, this was the 3rd forest that they had seen. They deserved to die. The Empress squeezed out these bone-chilling words from between her teeth. I will catch them and cut off their flesh inch by inch. Chi Ziding cursed loudly. Ba Man, Xiongyu, and the other aboriginals were also furious. The ones lying here were all aboriginals. Furthermore, they were being used as nutrients. Although they had heard that the jade-waisted slaves used the aboriginals as a breeding ground, they didn't expect this forest to be the same. How many aboriginals would be killed by these jade-waisted slaves in this forest? The Empress walked to Gongzheng, raised her hand, and pressed it on his forehead. Gongzheng immediately stopped breathing. Destroy this entire forest. the Empress said coldly before turning and walking in a certain direction. Renbaqian hurriedly followed behind her. The two of them walked for more than 5 kilometers before the Empress stopped and stood there in silence. It was obvious that she was in a terrible mood. Renbaqian didn't say anything. He found a place beside her to sit down and think about something. After a long time, the Empress let out a long sigh as if a gust of wind had blown up. With this sigh, the suffocating feeling in the Empress's heart was slightly alleviated. They deserve to die. They deserve to die. The Empress said hatefully. They do deserve to die, but I just thought of something, Renbaqian said. Speak. The 3 herdsmen that we have seen so far have a forest like this around each of them. Furthermore, the jade-waisted slaves come to these forests at night. This kind of forest should be related to the jade-waisted slaves that the herdsmen graze, Renbaqian said. The Empress nodded. According to Bohr, there are more than 30 herdsmen here, so there are more than 30 such forests. Each herdsman has at least a few thousand jade-waisted slaves, and some even have tens of thousands of them. Just these jade-waisted slaves alone require the lives of 300,000 people. Including these forests, I'm afraid that even 500,000 to 600,000 people wouldn't be able to stop them. With so many people disappearing, why didn't anyone discover this before? Why didn't anyone suspect anything? Chapter 781. Why didn't anyone notice that hundreds of thousands of people were missing? Where did these people come from? Why didn't the surrounding villages notice anything wrong? Without Renbaqian's reminder, the Empress wouldn't have thought of this. However, with his reminder, she immediately realized the seriousness of this matter. What do you think? The Empress asked with a gloomy face. First of all, there are a few things that need to be clarified. Renbaqian frowned as he pondered. First of all, how long do these herdsmen live? The jade-waisted slaves in the villages that we have passed through have been in human bodies for more than 10 years, but they still haven't completely turned into jade-waisted slaves. In other words, the cultivation of jade-waisted slaves takes at least 20 years. In that case, how long did it take for these herdsmen to cultivate the jade-waisted slaves and this forest? 500,000 to 600,000 people may seem like a lot, but if it is stretched to 100 years or even longer, the number of people going missing every year will decrease significantly. Even so, 50,000 to 60,000 people going missing every year isn't a small number. Secondly, these jade-waisted slaves are consumables and food. What is the rate of their consumption? The numbers mentioned above are calculated based on the current number of jade-waisted slaves. Taking into account the consumption of hundreds of years, the previously estimated number will be greatly increased. It could be up to 1 million or even 2 million people. At this point, the Empress's face turned extremely ugly. Renbaqian's words suddenly made her feel that the Aboriginals were livestock raised here, just like the fork-horned cattle and jumping goats that were raised outside the mountains. Thirdly, and most importantly, how many herdsmen are there? There are more than 30 of them in this group. According to Bohr, they will give up their childhood memories when they reach adulthood. In other words, they actually have a place to live. There must be some herdsmen living there to take care of the young. The others will leave when they reach adulthood and find a place to live alone. Where is that gathering place? What is the total number of herdsmen? What is their fertility and lifespan? Renbaqian's 3 questions made the Empress gloomy, and she remained silent. There were too many things that could be drawn from these 3 questions. Just the 30 herdsmen here alone had caused millions of Aboriginals to die in their hands. If there were more herdsmen. But I don't think there are many herders. Renbaqian thought for a while and said, if there were hundreds of herdsmen, the death toll over the years would be 10 times higher. More than 10 million people is already close to the total population of the Aboriginals. After all, the total population of the Aboriginals was only slightly more than 10 million. Anything else? The Empress waited for a moment. Seeing that he didn't speak, she turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were shining brightly in the darkness. I have an idea. The Aboriginals that the herdsmen targeted must have been at the edge of the strongholds. That way, they wouldn't be easily discovered. But with such a large number, it was impossible to hide it for so long. The only possibility was that the nearby stronghold was also under their control. A portion of the people in the strongholds were moved to this secret place and turned into jade-wasted slaves. The people in the other strongholds were left behind as a barrier. This way, even if their behavior was slightly inappropriate, the other strongholds would not think too much about it even if they were suspicious. Compared to disappearing directly, this method was much harder to detect. Every once in a while, this barrier would slowly move inward. Renbaqian drew a circle on the ground, and then another circle on the edge of the garden. By moving inward bit by bit, they are nibbling away at the aboriginals. The Empress felt her hair stand on end when she heard this, and all her hair stood on end. However, the most dangerous thing about these herdsmen is that they have always been secretive and unknown. Now that we know about them, it will be much easier to deal with them. They aren't strong, and we have already killed 3 herdsmen, let alone the aboriginals. They might have been discovered by experts before. Renbaqian comforted her. Then he looked a little strange and said, "However, I'm afraid that those experts have failed at telling them their names." Just thinking about it, with the temperament of the aboriginals, they would probably fall for the herdsmen's tricks if they were asked for their names. After a long time, the Empress heaved a sigh of relief, looked at Renbaqian, and said, "You are quite smart." "Definitely. There's no need to doubt me." Renbaqian gave her a thumbs up and revealed his white teeth. However, his white teeth weren't so conspicuous under his glowing skin. The Empress stood up and said, "Let's go back. I can't run anymore. Please carry me." Renbaqian opened his arms. Renbaqian was held by the neck by the Empress and carried back. "Brother, come here for a while." The Empress called Qi Ziding aside and told him what had happened. Qi Ziding's expression changed drastically after hearing this. "Is that really the case? It's just a guess, but the possibility is very high. Didn't you see an abandoned village before?" Renbaqian asked. Qi Ziding's face was gloomy as he swung his cane at the tree next to him, sending the upper half of the tree flying. After breaking 7 or 8 trees in a row, Qi Ziding vented his anger and slowly calmed down. "Yes, it's indeed possible," Qi Ziding said. "Xiaoya, what are you going to do? You know the 60,000 mountains better than I do. Find some people to check if there are any problems with the surrounding villages. If there are any problems, report them immediately and kill them once they are confirmed," the Empress said coldly. "If we check all the villages on the periphery, I'm afraid it won't be completed in a year," Qi Ziding said. After all, it wasn't easy to transmit information in the 60,000 mountains, and the deeper one went, the more difficult it was. "No matter how long it takes, these foreign races must die," the Empress said coldly. "What about your marriage?" Qi Ziding asked with a frown. The Empress was silent for a while. Renbaqian then said, "It's more important. Thank you for your concern, brother-in-law." Qi Ziding spat. In any case, it seemed that his marriage with the Empress would have to be delayed for some time. Although this matter is important, you don't have to stay here all the time. There are still many cardinal heaven experts in the depths of the 60,000 mountains, and I have seen more than 30 of them. As long as we gather these people together, we can easily kill these foreign races. Furthermore, Dayo doesn't only have the 60,000 mountains. The previous emperor and countless ancestors fought for the outside world with their blood. There are also Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Chen nation eyeing us covetously. The Yun nation has died. Renbaqian suddenly said. "What?" Qi Ziding was stunned. "The Yun nation has died and is no more. The emperor of the Yun nation is a guest in Lan City. In the future, you can call it the Yun province or the Yun protectorate." Renbaqian laughed. "When did this happen? Why didn't I know about it?" Qi Ziding was stunned. The Yun nation had fallen? It had only been a few years, and such a big thing had happened outside? "It has been a few months, and Great Xia isn't far from falling," Renbaqian said. Great Xia had also been in trouble recently. Previously, Xia Bailong was killed by the stench, and the royal family of Great Xia moved out of the palace 3 months later. After that, the security was naturally very tight. It took a long time for the second batch of stink bombs that Renbaqian sent over to find a way to get into the palace. Then it exploded 2 months ago. This time someone died again. It was the Empress Dowager. Ever since Xia Baicheng's death, her condition hadn't been very good. It had only been half a year since she returned to the palace, and the second batch of stink bombs exploded. Her body was already in poor condition, and she smelled this familiar formula and smell. She fainted on the spot and died the next day. 2 consecutive stink bombs were detonated in the palace. The first time, the previous emperor died, and the second time, the Empress Dowager died. This caused Great Xia, which boasted that it was the most powerful country in the world, to be slapped in the face and pushed into the cesspool. Everyone felt as if they could smell the stench that lingered in their bones. The Emperor of Great Xia issued 7 orders to the border guards in a row, urging them to speed up the attack. The royal family and the court wanted to see the news of victory in half a month. Half a month later, the Empress received the news. Hongwu and Zidonglai sent 20,000 reinforcements, defeating the 400,000-strong Great Xia army in one fell swoop. They also seized Tiesua Pass and 3 other border guards. After seizing the 3 border guards, Hongwu sent troops into Great Xia's territory to plunder more than 30 cities before returning with a full load. At present, Dayo had no intention of conquering Great Xia. Conquering the Yun nation was their top priority. After seizing these 3 border guards, Great Xia's doors were wide open. A few days after the Empress received the news, the entire Great Xia court was in mourning. Then taxes were raised and soldiers were conscripted again. However, at this time, there was news that made things worse. Chapter 782. In an official yamen in Qingzhou. At this moment, it was occupied by a group of elite soldiers in green cotton armor. The heads of the officials who were originally in the yamen were hung in a row outside the yamen. The dark red ice on the ground was slowly melting under the sun. Su Qing, who was wearing a thin shirt, walked out of the room. The cold wind outside immediately woke him up. After breakfast, Su Qing casually asked the guard, "Is Qing Lian still in the room?" "Yes. She hasn't come out for the past 2 days." Su Qing frowned. Dingzhou, Qingzhou, and Pingzhou had all revolted according to the plan. Although Great Xia was at its weakest, its hundreds of years of rule was deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. Although he had planned for many years, most of the revolutionary soldiers were just ordinary people who couldn't survive. There were less than 10,000 elites. At this time he had to be careful and handle many things. However, after Qing Lian returned from Dayo, she didn't share the burden. Instead, she plunged into the room and did this for a month. Every day, she would hold those books that people couldn't understand and write and draw. Su Qing felt that Qing Lian seemed to have changed into a different person after going out. Or did something happen to her over there? Su Qing stood in place and pondered for a while before deciding to talk to her. After all, Qing Lian was a great help in terms of wisdom and tactics. Furthermore, her lifespan was shorter than that of ordinary practitioners. Furthermore, she was a woman and wouldn't pose too much of a threat to him. Su Qing came to the door of Qing Lian's room and knocked. There was no response. However, he heard the sound of something colliding inside. "Qing Lian." Su Qing raised his voice and shouted, "Come in." A melodious female voice came from the room. Su Qing pushed the door open and saw Qing Lian sitting in front of the table with disheveled hair and a dirty face. She threw a needle on the table and wrote something on a piece of paper. Then she picked up the needle and threw it again. Su Qing felt that she was simply crazy. He had never seen her in such a disheveled state before, but now she was sitting here with disheveled hair and a dirty face. Her eyes were bloodshot when she occasionally turned her head. He reckoned that she hadn't rested since yesterday. "What are you doing?" Su Qing walked forward and found a piece of paper on Qing Lian's table. There were horizontal lines drawn on it. Qing Lian was holding a needle and repeatedly throwing it on the paper. "I'm verifying a question. The distance between these threads is 2 inches, and this needle is 1.5 inches long. If I throw this needle down, what are the chances of it hitting one of the threads?" Qing Lian's hands did not stop moving as she spoke. Not long after, she exclaimed in admiration, "I've tried more than 3,000 times, And it's just as the book says. It's really amazing. Su Qing said solemnly. I have something to discuss with you. Wait. I'll finish the rest first. Qing Lian said without raising her head. After a long while, Qing Lian finally put down her pen and stretched her body. She leaned against the back of the chair and said lazily, What's the matter? What are you doing every day now? Su Qing stood a little further away and asked. You wouldn't understand even if I told you. Qing Lian said lazily and yawned. Su Qing's frown deepened. In fact, he had mentioned it once before, but Qing Lian had said the same thing, which made him quite dissatisfied. Now that big things are starting to happen, you have been looking at these things every day since you came back from Dayo. You don't care about anything else. Qing Lian, don't forget our agreement. Su Qing pointed at the things on the table with an ugly expression. Qing Lian looked up at him and said, Oh, you think what I'm doing now is useless, right? That's right. Su Qing said while suppressing his anger. Qing Lian stood up from the chair, walked to the window, and waved her hand. A cold light flashed, and a sword appeared in her hand. She turned to look at Su Qing and said, I know you have a trick called Rain Gate. Use it on me and see if I can block it. My back is facing you. Are you crazy? Su Qing asked with a livid face. Why don't you try and see if I'm crazy? Don't you want to know what I'm doing every day? Qing Lian's eyes curved like a crescent moon, and her face was full of smiles. Seeing the smile on Qing Lian's face, Su Qing became even angrier. You are a sword slave, and your cultivation comes from the sword in your hand. You don't have any abilities, so what right do you have to look down on me? Wait. Qing Lian suddenly shouted. Let's go out and try. It would be a pity if you break anything. Su Qing was even angrier, but he endured it and said, Fine. He made up his mind. Although he wasn't as strong as Qing Lian, if she wanted to block this move with her back facing him, he would definitely teach her a lesson. The two of them left the house, and Qing Lian stood in the middle of the courtyard, holding the sword with her back facing Su Qing, and said, Make your move. Be careful. Su Qing warned. Rain Gate was one of the 3 killer moves of Su Qing's sect. As the name suggested, it was like opening the heavenly gate of rain. Su Qing didn't carry any weapons, but his hand suddenly emitted thousands of silver lights, which fell on Qing Lian like a downpour. Even an ant would have no place to hide under such heavy rain, let alone a human. However, Qing Lian held the sword in her right hand and drew a line in the air, and the sound of pearls and jade falling on a plate rang out. Su Qing looked at Qing Lian, who didn't move at all, and his face turned pale with shock in his eyes. Impossible, how did you do it? Rain Gate was one of the 3 killer moves of his sect. Over the years, countless experts had been targeted by this move, so how could Qing Lian block all of it with her back facing him? Qing Lian put away her sword. Her chest rose and fell slightly, and there was some sweat on her head, but she looked very proud. I calculated it. This method of algebra is really amazing. Your rain gate looks like it's going straight down, but there's actually a sequence and a certain pattern in it. As long as I can calculate the probability of your attack, I'll be able to block this move. Su Qing was dumbfounded. Of course, it's easy to say, but it's actually very troublesome to calculate. I have to calculate the angle of each move, and the landing point of each move. I have a deep understanding of you, and I've tried to calculate this move of yours before, so I was able to calculate it. If someone else had used this move, I wouldn't have been able to calculate it in such a short time. Qing Lian softened her voice, or rather, she was comforting Su Qing. Otherwise, that old fellow in his sect would definitely think of a way to kill him. Su Qing's face alternated between green and white. He was indeed frightened. It was simply too terrifying. She actually blocked all of his moves with her back facing him? As for what Qing Lian said after that, he was skeptical. After a long while, Su Qing let out a long sigh. Even so, the most important thing now is the uprising. My ancestors have been planning for many years, and you and I have been preparing for this for many years, not to mention those who have bet their lives on this matter. Don't you know what's more important? Qing Lian's eyes turned, and she immediately beamed with joy. This matter is easy to handle. Send all the information to my room, and I'll give you an answer in 3 days. 3 days later, Su Qing received a whole stack of papers that were filled with data. From the time of the imperial court's recruitment, the number of people, the calculation of rations, the reaction time of the imperial court, the generals sent out, and the responses of the various regions. Everything was marked with percentages. Even which route, how many troops to attack, how long it would take, and the probability of success were all marked with percentages. After Su Qing finished reading the stack of papers, his mind was filled with 3 words. How is this possible? How did she manage to do it? How real are these things? At this moment, Qing Lian was in a deep sleep in her room, and there was a hint of exhaustion on her face. She was still tightly holding a book called Probability Theory and Mathematical Statistics in her hand. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.